All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome out there. Hopefully everything's working good and you can hear us all. I've got 3 people here with me today that I'm going to introduce. For anybody who's never been here before, I'm Jason, a game developer, and I have a YouTube channel and talk about game dev stuff. Next to me, I've got Jason Story. Oh, look at this. I can point in the right direction. Jason, oh, somehow. I'll figure it out. Jason Story over there, who is also a developer who talks about all kinds of awesome game dev stuff and probably one of the most experienced C# programmers I know. Great advice there. Below me is Dylan. Okay, this is neat. I can just point all around. Dylan Watkins. He's a great friend and a VR developer who's run many companies and done tons of VR development. Kind of got me into VR and really kind of lit fire under my ass for virtual reality development. Also has a podcast that I've linked down below. And oh, there we go. Andrew, who I'm sure if you do any game development in Unity at all, you've seen plenty of his assets on the asset store or just on infinitypbr.com. So welcome, everybody. Today we're just going to be talking about game development, virtual reality, Unity, and other stuff. We were already starting to have an interesting conversation before we got live, and I just wanted to hit the button, get us live, and get going. So welcome, everybody. Thanks everybody, for coming out here, too.
Yeah, man.
There, I introduced everybody first time.
Glad to be here, brother. And it's awesome to be hanging around a bunch of other devs in the space, man. We used to do this with meetups and get together and share beers and talk about the woes of development. And so it's great to connect with everybody.
Yeah, this is very much my replacement for that. Not being able to like go randomly once a month to meet up with other developers and talk to people around a table and see some random discussion about usually there's always like some presentation that would be at these things, and sometimes I'd get something useful out of it, but most time it's just the chat and then like, hey, maybe I'll get something cool out of this presentation too. And this is very much just trying to replace that. This and meetups and stuff and other things that I try to do online just to give some sense of like being able to talk to other people who are interested in the same stuff. Because my wife doesn't like game development and my kids are too young, so I got to talk to somebody about this stuff, right?
Yeah, it's I consider game development to be professional big kid stuff. You know, yeah, you get to like, you're like, look what I did! I made this thing explode when you hit this button. Ah! It's one of the, you know. So fun.
It's building your own childhood memories. I mean, I always wonder like how many game devs today did not play games when they were a kid. You know, probably very, very few.
Yeah, man, for sure. Yeah, I'm working with a client right now, and we're basically building the game of his dreams. And it's just like this. He's like everything that he wanted to get inside like a esports shooter kind of thing, and we just play it all the time, and it's super fun. But it's like, yeah, you just get to do what you love, which is so awesome.
Yeah, the very first time I got my I got my DK1, and back then there wasn't head tracking and there wasn't anything fancy, so I had my Razer Hydras. That's how you did hand tracking back in the day. And the very first thing I did in Unity, the very first project I ever made, was telekinesis, because it has to be. I was just throwing blocks at stuff and blowing things up, and I used like fractured meshes so I could destroy stuff. And all I did is I put on ridiculous music and just like destroyed stuff for about an hour and a half. Good times.
Did you hook the thing on your chest? Was it the Razer Hydra where you
it was on the head? Yeah, like you'd strap one to your head, and then alternatively you could have one on your belt. But it was usually better if you had one on your head and one in your hand, so you had this weird like cable going to your head. I honestly, unironically, that Razer Hydra, I despised it. It was the worst piece of dev hardware I ever had to use, but it's the only thing that did that. So I went and did a full office space on it when it was done. I unironically took it outside and I beat it to death because we got access to like the Oculus touch controllers. It was like, this actually works. It was just ridiculous.
VR has been a perpetual game of almost awesome, and that's what it's been for a series of years. It's like, oh, it's so another time. So, but yeah, I totally feel you on that one, man. I think my first VR game I made was VR Bomberman, and I brought it to the first meetup that we did. And I just got to like, blowing up boxes and run around and trying to like blow up things and just first experience. Because my very first VR experience was like 90s, where like you have that big rig that comes down that's like 700 pounds and you hold it. And I got to play Pac-Man VR, which like seems to be awesome, but then I realized, oh my god, I can't see over the top of the walls anymore, like Labyrinth style. So I was just running around, and so I think the Bomberman was my kind of like, homage to playing my first VR experience, which was super fun and tried and true. Like hours before the event, it didn't work, and I felt like nothing was going to work. And then at the last minutes, it came through and actually functioned, and I got to show it off at the meetup. So,
Nice. I was very late to the VR. I would say very late. I mean, I hit this generation cycle. So the Rift first one was my first VR headset, and so the very first VR experience I ever tried was the Oculus Tuscany demo.
Yeah.
But I had to be so too smart for my own good. And because I had ordered the Hydra as well as the Oculus, the Hydra came first. And I was still waiting for the Kickstarter because I was in Ireland, one of the last groups to get them. And then when it arrived, I didn't boot up the standard Tuscany. I booted up the modded Tuscany by Teddy, where he'd added support for it. I thought, this is awesome. I get to go in like full time with the whole thing. But I didn't understand the difference between head tracking and no head tracking at the time. So I put on the VR headset, I held both hands, and I look in and someone's put a basketball on the ground in the demo scene. And so the very first thing I did was reach down to pick up that basketball. No head tracking. My head stays here. The rest of my body moves forward, and I just sort of lurch, and then I fall over, and I feel this like gut-wrenching headache, and I end up lying down for like 6 hours and go, oh, maybe I'm one of those people who can't do VR. Maybe I've just ruined myself, and like I'm one of those people who will be sick and never be able to play it. I was super bummed out, but yeah.
Oh no. So, early days of VR could be a cruel mistress. It's a painful situation when you find that out, and that's one of the things that they're so terrified with, like the development. Why Oculus only releases like high quality, like high FPS running smoothly experiences is because they don't want the ET effect. Like that's the big thing that they're afraid of. That there's going to be some, your first experience with it, you're so sensitive that it will, if you don't have that deep passion, if you're just like a voyeuristic person going to go try VR and you get thrown in something like that, and then you end up like throwing it violently or whatever the thing might be, you feel like you've been on a ship tossed at sea, like you're not going to come back and play it. And so that's, as for good or for ill, that's one of the reasons why Oculus doesn't let in things that are like low FPS and things that will cause a lot of lag effects, because we know that experience. As soon as you described that, I felt my gut start to turn a little bit. I was like, ooh, I'm sorry. Oh man. Jason, what was your first experience
with VR? It was, oh man. So outside of the old school things in the arcade, because I had tried those too, the big pull down rigs that just drew like lines in red or green. Which I thought were like amazing. And I was like, that is the coolest shit ever. Like I would, and it was like $5 to play or something, right? But I would have played them nonstop if I, wasn't a poor little kid. But outside of that, it was definitely on the first Rift. I don't remember where I played. I think I ordered it it was right after the Kickstarter. That's right. I missed the Kickstarter. And right after the Kickstarter, I got it in like the first round of shipments that they sent out of the Rift 1. And then that was the first time I actually got to really try it out. I hadn't actually tried anybody else's before that. And I was just kind of hooked. I was like, this thing is freaking amazing. I was like, look at this. Like I just put it into, I was already doing Unity development. So I was already a Unity developer. And I could instantly just kind of like plug it in and look around and see stuff, like see my worlds. I started pulling up all my old games and just looking at them in VR. I pulled up an MMO I was working on and started looking at that in VR. I was like, yeah, this is awesome. Like everything can be in VR now. I can just make every game into a VR game. And I was hooked for quite a long time, just nonstop, just making all the different VR types of things. I think the first actual like mini game thing that I made where you could actually play was just like a hang glider game, because you couldn't, like you said, you couldn't do the motion or the positional tracking. There was no tracking for the head, like where you moved it or anything, but you could see the tilt. So I just made like a hang gliding game where you just tilted your head to control which direction you moved. It was like nice and simple. So you just kind of like look and it would tilt up, and like down, it would tilt down. And you just kind of hang glide around random environments, and just grabbed a bunch of different environments and asset packs off the asset store and started building all kinds of different stuff, and just that was kind of how I showed people VR stuff for the longest time. I would just jump into Unity and be like, yeah, just make this little world, bam, put it on the headset, and now you're in it. And people are like, what the fuck? Awesome.
That's dope, man. They've made those into actual games, like where you're like, you know, like a flying squirrel, or what do you go? I don't know the name of those things where you have those suits on that you fly through the area and you're just like looking where you're going. I mean, that's what they tried to do with like the Oculus Go. And it was pretty successful. But I think, you know, that's 3 DoF, 3 degrees of freedom. And now we're going to 6 DoF where it does the positional tracking, which is better. So they've since have discontinued the Oculus Go. So it's a no-go now. So we have it.
Although it stands out though, it's one of the few that has the cool silvery different look to the others. So when it's on your shelf, it's the one different looking one.
That's true. That is true. They kind of have that Apple color scheme going on. I feel like a lot of things that they do is they try to model what Apple does, and they go, oh, "Okay, we'll do that," even though they have like hatred of each other.
Yeah. I mean, they got rid of the Go because they did the Quest 2, though, right? Isn't that kind of the reason? And the Quest 2 is so much better. It's actually like I don't really use my Quest 2 often, but it is definitely an amazing device. When I first popped it on, I was like, "Holy crap! Like this is like." What I was expecting VR to get like you can just play any VR game with hand tracking anywhere you want. Walk around. I can walk around my house with the thing on and see totally fine. Or randomly start shooting stuff or playing with lightsabers, and it's pretty cool. I just don't have a lot of energy or time to do it. But
I think people ask me which headsets. I've had people ask me which one's the right headset to get these days, and the thing is, right, there's no competition anymore. I think honestly, for the most part, anyone's like, I want to get into VR, Quest 2, just get a Quest 2. Like we're talking, there used to be days where it was Vive versus Oculus, and you'd go on these huge rants on the subreddit of, but this has all of the, you know, the laser trackers. They're much more detailed. Yeah, but then have to set all this stuff up, and do you have all the cables? And now it's like, no, just like once you've got inside out tracking, the problem solved. Just give someone a headset, give someone controllers. They're 6 degree, go for it. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a Sega versus Nintendo battle for a while, right? And they're like, oh, and there was both sides of the fence. And you're right. And now it's at the point. It's like, dude, just go get the Quest 2. If you don't like Facebook, go get a fake Facebook account. Go get that stuff going. You know, just whatever you want to call that. You know, and just move on, because you're right. You can't compete. I mean, I know I was talking to dudes from HTC, and they're like, we can't compete because we're a hardware company, and Facebook's got Facebook money, and so they don't care how much the headset costs. And so it's like $1,000 headset that they're selling for $300, you know, minus the Facebook login tracking stuff that they want to do. So, you know, it's not a real competition anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Should have known Oculus would win though, because I was all heavy on Valve and Vive and HTC. So
Same.
Every time there's a hardware fight, like I always pick the loser as like my main. I still have my HD DVD player laying around somewhere.
Betamax is making a comeback.
One day, damn it! I did find a VHS tape though. I'll have to pull that down. I found an old VHS tape up on my shelf that I need to strip into a digital video. It was a friend of mine who went on a talk show a long time ago when we were teenagers. Good stuff. On Montel Williams.
Explain that to your kids. I'd like to see that.
Like, oh, just sit there and start pushing it. And like, there's buttons. Buttons aren't working. This tablet doesn't work.
Dude, you want to freak out a kid? Show them the dial-a-tone sound that you used to make when you connect that.
56K.
Yeah.
That's the hacking sound, Dylan. That's the hacking sound in movies.
That's my favorite thing to watch is when people hack in movies and you just see the lines of code just going super fast, and it's like.
At least they get the indentation good.
The best was that one. I think it was Criminal Minds or something, where two people they had to back hack somebody, so two people used the same keyboard. That's definitely going to make it work better. Two people hacking on the same keyboard.
That was the NCIS.
That's what it was. So dumb.
Two people use the same computer. I couldn't imagine.
Keyboard, yeah, just a big keyboard on both sides.
Can you imagine a dev studio? Hey guys, we're going to make things more efficient here, so we're only going to use one keyboard. We've got 2 devs per one keyboard.
The funny thing is, I've seen that work. Just not at the same time.
Yeah. Pair programming is very different than both just mashing the keyboard and hoping for the best.
That sounds like a hackathon move. You're at a hackathon. You're like, hey man, my keyboard's broken. Can I borrow yours? You know. So.
Oh. No, I've seen some on the actual pair programming though, and mob programming. I have seen it work really well with multiple keyboards set up on a system where they don't actually have to swap keyboards. They just kind of like take turns without actually moving positions in a big giant screen.
Okay.
So like kind of sharing it and working on it.
So you all you work in the same script. So you have the same like.
Oh yeah, they're working on the exact same problem. I've seen it. I mean, at a pair level, it's not very uncommon. I would say probably like 10 to 20% of people have probably done some pair programming before where they're working like just with another developer side by side, kind of back and forth, taking turns who's typing on the keyboard, but they're still solving the problem together, like talking through what the code's going to be and stuff.
Yeah.
But the bigger scenarios that I've seen, like my buddy Chris runs these mobs where they do this mob programming where it's 3 to 5 people at a time, and they're on these big giant 84-inch screens at big desks with 2 sets of keyboards. And they're insanely productive. They're like super productive on all their work and relatively like extremely low on bugs because everything gets caught by all the eyes there and everybody gets really good there too. One of the things I noticed, I've been to his office a couple times because he'll let developers, actually I should just talk to him, see if they're still doing that. Oh, whenever they start doing it again. But they would let developers come in and like work alongside them and see what their environment was like and basically just mob with them for the day. And it was really, really impressive. Like, I mean, the junior developers knew a lot more than a lot of senior developers I've met because they're learning every day constantly from everybody. And everybody seemed to work really well and really fast. So I was blown away. Yeah, well, if they ever start that up again, I'll have to hook you up and get you a tour or something if I can. It's really cool stuff.
That'd be super cool. I'd love to check that out. It's one of those ones that
not on the same keyboard at the same time.
No. I'd definitely like to see that out because I could see how like the hive mind, you know, like I mean that's technically it's a hive mind. I mean that's what we're doing. We're hive minding around. I mean we do that internally.
What it is, it's just no handoff. So it speeds things up. It was really weird because it seems like externally like a terribly inefficient concept, like having 5 people all doing the same thing. But then you actually see it in action and you see the results and just how much faster it goes and how there's no stop. Like when you have a team of 5 people working on something, there's no break. Like there's no pause in anything unless everybody stops to go to lunch. Outside of that, like, you know, any one person or 2 people getting distracted for a minute, going to the bathroom, going to check an email or whatever, doesn't stop the workflow. So the flow is like constantly going and there's no context switch back into it or makes the context switch much quicker. And that's like the
part
hardest thing.
A lot of people don't realize. A lot of people don't realize that like if you actually record yourself, like turn on your camera while you're programming, you're typing 15 to 20% of the time. The majority of your time is just staring at your screen. So when you realize like typing is only, you're figuring out a problem, you type, then you sit back, you scroll, you click around a bit, you type a bit, you stop, you do the same thing. If you think about it, then having one keyboard doesn't sound as crazy because all you're doing is you're having more eyes on the problem. And when you look at the burn downs of companies, a lot of the cost isn't actually in writing the code the first time. It's in regressions, solving bugs, and the other problems that come with that, like siloing, where you've got a bunch of people on a team and 1 or 2 people just don't know how to fix a bug. So you have to wait till like one person who wrote the system is available again to do it and all this sort of like backlogs and stops. If everybody's working on the same system, everybody knows the system inside out and everybody's constantly like churning the same information. There's a lot of it's a lot of stuff that you get to do once.
That's cool. That reminds me a bit of like hackathons where like you get stuck on something, you can like raise your hand, and because you're around a group of people, you can get a lot more. That one of the saddest things is when you're in a silo by yourself. You're in a silo by yourself for like a long time, weeks on. You're like, why is this not working? And you know, maybe it's a comma or something. It's like some small little thing that if some senior could look at it and go, hey, just do that. You just keep going. But it's that hard stop. And that's one of the hardest things to get started with the program is when you hit those walls and there's nobody to talk to. It can be a very lonely, I'm on an island kind of thing.
And they don't even need to be like a more senior developer. Like when just having another person look at your code makes a huge difference when you're in that, like having 2 people there. If there's a problem, you're gonna find it. You're gonna be much better at finding it. Like I do that all the time. When I get stuck on stuff, I just show the code to somebody. Hey, can you look at this real quick? I'm missing something. What the hell is it? And somebody else will find it. It's just getting that second set of eyes on stuff.
Yeah.
And they certainly don't have to be like, they just be at your same level, even below your level, and point out stuff. They can be way less experienced and still see the issue. I think like when you're writing code and you stare at it too much, you just miss things. Like you become blind to problems because you've seen the code so many times that your brain is filling in the missing part or the problem, and fixing it for you.
Well, there's that code term called the rubber ducky.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about, right? If you want to explain that at all,
I do that to myself and to my colleagues all the time, because I am not an expert coder by any means, but so I'm going through code, solving problems, trying to figure things out, and I miss stuff, the simplest stuff like a comma, right? Or I pass the wrong thing through, and I'll sit there and I'll be like trying to figure out, and then all of a sudden I'm like, hey, Dean or whoever at work, I'm trying to figure out this thing, what's going on? And either in that conversation where I'm slacking to him, or right after I hit send, of course, I'm like, oh shoot. And I come up with a solution. It's always like some easy solution where I've missed something obvious. And a lot of people will just send back a GIF of a rubber ducky. They're happy to help. Yeah. So rubber duck it by talking to yourself. And as if you're talking to somebody else. Talk to the rubber duck as if you're talking to somebody else. And a lot of times you'll solve the problem just by saying it out loud.
Yeah. It's a super powerful, it's that step back thing. And I will say, if you look at just what happened here, just a little meta moment, right? If you look at just what happened right now, we're all rapping about this thing. Jason from Ireland dropped off the connection, lost his beat, and we just kept the conversation rolling through the whole thing. So much like the mob programming, when we lose a beat for a second, like everyone just picks up the conversation and we pass things around. And so we get to continue along the storyline and the journey together. And welcome back, Jason. Good to see you, brother.
Yeah, my internet, this is Ireland, it hates me. Like no matter how much money I spend on my equipment, as long as I've got a really trickled internet, it's always going to keep intermittently dropping out. But to kind of respond to your point about the rubber ducky programming, which I am also a huge big fan of, I do all of the time. It's not just great for solving problems. I use it a lot to figure out if I'm on the right track. So the idea is not just if you're talking to your rubber duck and you try to explain what it does. Just say, oh, I'm doing a thing that gets a thing and puts this in there and uploads this file or whatever. If you were having trouble explaining that to the rubber duck and start have to say, well, I've got an injected service that does a thing, you're like, well, hang on a second. If I can't even explain this to somebody else, have I gone down the wrong rabbit hole with this? So I find treating that mentality of like, if I can't clearly explain the task I'm trying to solve, maybe I should stop and revisit the task. And that's actually really helpful to kind of stop me wasting like a day coding something pointless because I've gone down the wrong path,
Do you ever draw things say, okay, I'm doing this and I'm trying like design wise, okay, I have this box. I'm trying to get this box. When I go into this room, I, click a button and this thing explodes. Do you ever sometimes take a step back and like visualize things by drawing them up at all? Or is it all verbal, or how do you work through that?
I definitely do. I've got this whiteboard next to me and it's here specifically to draw out problems. I don't use it very often. More often than not, there's pictures of cats on it. But aside from that, I do use it for that exact purpose, and that's why it's here. So I could just pick it up real quick.
That's awesome. Cats, the internet's mascot. Oh, what is going on here? So you got some code, you got some designs over there.
Yeah. I write stuff out. I draw. There's screen designs. I was mocking something out, and then various different. And then I have code ideas. I don't do the formal UML stuff, but what I will do is because from a UX perspective, I like to design stuff as how they'll be experienced by the user, and then separately, I'll reason about how the code architecture meets it. I consider, oftentimes as a developer, you can get stuck making something very coder heavy and kind of lose the human touch of how it's supposed to actually interact with human beings. So designing it as a consumer on one side and designing it as code on the other kind of helps you bridge the gap of what would the ideal contract look like.
Yeah. When you're talking about the presentation layer, what does it look like for them to experience versus the logic layer? You can go through it. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, that's great.
Especially for level design and stuff, because levels got flow really into the structuring an experience separately from code and separately from the UI. There's draw a line of like the experiential beat a person has as they play a game, you want highs and lows. If it's constantly high, they get fatigued. If it's constantly low, it's boring. So if you draw it out, you can sort of map this like experiential graph to keep it interesting. You kind of need the vec to get there.
That's really cool. I mean, you can. That's actually a really powerful thing. If you look at the player's journey, the user's journey, and you map it out on like an emotional arc and story, you can tell it's almost like a musical notes, right? The song, right? The song doesn't just have one thing. There's like a crescendo, and it goes through the whole process. So that's really cool. And I think I don't think people do that enough. Where you actually go, okay, what are people going to feel as they go through this, and how do I take them on this journey, and how do I cause a little bit of Schadenfreude here, and how do I give them some payback here, and just mapping those things out I think it's a really useful concept. Wow. What are your guys' favorite things to do in games? Like in terms of like mechanics to design or things to build, are there things that you personally like? Like, cause Schadenfreude's like harm joy, like the joy you get from seeing someone else suffer, right? Or there's other ones. Are there things like, it's a lot of like esports games kind of thing. Are there certain games or mechanics in games that you love to either create or to experience?
For me, it's building things. I enjoy Civilization games, the old SimCity games, in the like Might and Magic games I used to play when I was a kid. I would never beat the game. I would always end up starting over with a brand new party and rebuild my characters from scratch at some point during the game. Not because I was stuck, just because I felt like I want to go back and do a different one, a different build, and try different things. That's always what gets me.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I'm a big fan of just building games, RTS games, strategy games, especially the kind where you can build out an actual base, defend against other attacks, and that kind of stuff. And I like building just systems in games that do that kind of stuff too, that allow the players to build stuff or kind of like customize the world or build up their characters and kind of customize them. Like Andrew was saying, like the I even think back to like old Bard's Tale games, like on the old Commodore. Yeah, like I love playing those that customize the characters and get items and level them up. Stuff, or just any role playing stuff. So yeah, that's definitely my favorite. And I just while you guys were talking about writing notes, I was grabbing my notebook and starting to write down some notes for the call. It's like I use these things all the time too. Exactly the same as I think all of you, and I recommend this for everybody too. Like if you do any game development stuff or just development, like have a pencil. I would say maybe a pen, but pencil works for me. And then some sort of a notebook that's just handy. I like to keep one like by my bed, so when I get a random like great idea for a game or something else, or a great idea for a video, I can just write it down and not forget it. And I've got just ridiculous amounts of notes. Most of the stuff in here I end up not using. I'll be honest, like probably 75%, but 25% of it is good. And then sometimes I'll just go back through and find other great ideas that I had forgotten about and start using them. And then
here's my big tip. This pen, friction with an X in there. These are erasable pens, and they come in all sorts of colors, and they're actually erasable. Not like the old erasable pens where they'd leave a mark. These are amazing. They come in regular ballpoint and markers as well. And I have a whole slew of them. They change your note-taking life because you can now colorize your notes and erase them whenever you want.
Oh, that's awesome. I totally love it because I use these mechanical pencils for the most part, because you can draw, you can write and erase and stuff like that. My other pro tip in terms of taking notes, especially in VR, is if you have an Apple Watch like this, right? You have an Apple Watch like this. There's an app on that called the Bear app, and so the Bear app does speech to text right here. So one of the hardest things is when you're in VR and you're QAing, testing, or doing anything else, and you have to take off the headset, scribble it down. So what I do is I have a direct thing from here that I'll speak. Oh my God, bug, grenade, don't stick to XYZ or whatever, and I record it like that, and then I take that and I can share it directly from the Bear app right into Trello, and so it drops it right into Trello. So that's one of the easiest ways, because otherwise you have to like take your headset off, walk over here, take your headset off, walk over here, and it's just the bane of my existence when it comes to that kind of stuff. But
that's been the biggest step down in VR, in my opinion. Like, as much as I love it, like I have I have buckets, unironically, of headsets here. I've been working with this stuff since as long as I can remember. I've got about 15 more here I could pull out. But the point is, I've been working since the DK1, and the thing that was really good about the DK1 was that it was just a screen. You plug it in, you hold it up to your face, you can test stuff and whatever. By the time you hit now, you've got platform services, and you've got sensors inside the headset to make sure it's actually on your head, and you've got all of this other stuff. And so you can't do that quick iterative cycle that you used to do. Now it's this exhausting process of you have to try it on. You have to like push away from your desk, put on the headset, make sure there's enough space, do all this stuff. And it gets very difficult to just test like basic interaction stuff, which again, it speaks to it being more powerful, but it's just so exhausting when it used to just be, yeah, still works, cool, next thing, type some code, yeah, still works. Yeah.
Yeah. Back when we used to have an office, we had it dangling down from the top, right? You just like, it's like on those like carabiner kind of retractable clips, and you like pull it down and you can like lift it up and pull it down and lift it up. Yeah, it's just it's a process. It's a whole thing, man. So, but it is, it's more fun though. But yeah, I think everybody, I don't know like how many times you've been like, oh, I'll remember that. I'll remember that. That'll be fine. And then you just don't. It's just, we're not designed that way.
Yeah, I forget them all the time. I would always just find it most productive to use child labor. Just have I'd get my kids to wear the headset and do the things like, hey, try this on, play this game for me, until they started complaining too much.
I don't think
it's easy. Like they're great at giving feedback, and they're so honest. Like kids are the best for giving you like honest game feedback, because adults want to be nice and not hurt your feelings. A lot of kids just don't even realize, and they'll just tell you right off the bat like what's wrong with the game, why it sucks, and why they wouldn't play it, so you can fix it and figure it out. Like it works out pretty well.
That's awesome. That's a great entrepreneurial idea. Anybody want to start childlabor.com and they can
It's got to be your own kids.
but all the kids are my kids. I picture one of those like African kids. For 35 cents a day, you can get little Timmy a VR headset to play with. Like
yeah, no, I actually paid my kids to do it too.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah,
they love it, man. I was staying with my my brother for the holidays for about a month over in Florida, and there's like a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, my niece and nephew, and like they used to get so mad because like they would like they only got to play the VR on the weekends, and I'd be in my room with the door shut and locked, otherwise there's no boundaries, and they'd get so mad. They're like, why does he get to play VR right now? And I don't understand it. They're like, he's working. Like, he's not working. He's playing. I can hear him. They get so mad, man. They slide little notes on the door. Can I play? I was like, a little bit, and send it back to them. So, but yeah, right. It's honesty, man. That's what you need. The problem is that people are too nice, and they think they're trying to help you, but it really hurts you. And when people go, oh, this is great, but like, they don't understand that they're going to send you into the wolves' den. As we know, as game development, man, there's like game players, like they will crap all over your hopes and dreams and tell you how terrible it is. But it's because they're like, hey, this is my fun. You're taking my fun and you're making it a terrible experience. Don't you rob me of my fun. Do a better job. And it's fair. It's a fair thing to shit on. So.
Yeah, I find you can also get so much from, I mean, for all players, but especially with kids too, the reactions of how they react during the game. It's going to be much more raw. Obviously, it's coming from a different point of view in a different place than an adult would, but those reactions aren't going to be muted the way that an adult might mute their frustration with something, or mute how like some occurrence that happens. I'm talking now about board games really, but design a board game, something happens and adults will be like, okay, well, that just pissed me off, but I'm going to just keep it quiet. And a kid will be like, what? That's not fair. And then, you get this reaction like, okay, so this doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it means that there's a reaction here that this mechanic is actually having an effect on the player. And that's good feedback.
No filter, man.
It's also great for stream of consciousness stuff too. I've noticed, and I've said this example before. If you're an adult playing games who's been playing games a long time, there's this meta narrative in your head about how games work. And even if you're not a game designer, but you kind of know them intuitively. So the example I said before is whenever there's they did this in Heavy Rain where they had a bunch of options in a book and you had to sort of pick the right one for something, and it was like an origami thing. I'd never played the game up to this point. I came into my friend's house, he was playing it. I switched to like page 4, picked it, and picked the exact right one. And he's like, "How'd you know?" Well, if you're a game designer, you're not going to want to do the first one because it'll defeat this narrative beat. It's not going to be the last one because it'll feel too long. You're probably going to want somewhere in the middle. It was a toss-up between 2 or 3. And so you're kind of meta-narrating yourself out of the game. But kids just have this stream of consciousness where they'll go, "I want to do this thing. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, what about this thing? Can I do this?" And it's really immediate. You get to see what the actual relationship is with like direct engagement as opposed to this sort of like second-guessing thing that I tend to ruin myself with.
Man, programmers always hack the system. They always do it. It's like if they can find a way to cheat the system, even though it may not be as rewarding as a gameplay, but they can figure out what they're it's like the game of, can I figure out the way that you're thinking that, like, it's like this like Sherlock Holmesian style, like, I'm gonna figure this thing out. And so that's like how many times I've seen programmers break my games because there's like an exploitive feature that like, oh, did you realize if I hold your hand and you hold, like in Sweet Escape, one of our games, like you can climb on someone's head. And so someone else can grab another person's head and they can use that as an anchor point. And so if you have enough people, you can literally fly through space by grabbing each other's heads to get to places you're not supposed to be. So but you know, if it's there, they're going to do it. So
who found that one?
I was one of the developers. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Morgan, one of our old developers. But then people started doing it. Like they found it as a thing, right? And then, you know, as the information spreads. But yeah,
that's always my favorite too. And just playing games, trying to find ways to hack in them, cheat in them, automate. Not so much like because I want to do it, just like seeing if I can, trying to figure out the process of like, how can I modify this? Usually, like once I'm done with the game, I'm like, what could I do with this? I don't do it so much anymore, but back in the day, like I guess especially before I could create games myself, before I could really build them, I used to just really love tearing them apart and seeing what I could do and hack them. Like I said, even back on that old Commodore 64, I used to hack those little games by like swapping out the disc in the middle of the load and stuff to mess up the data, and it would give me randomized items, and I'd get super powered in some games. Other games would just crash and blow up. But just trying it with different stuff, I like figure out like what discs I could put in at different points in different games to cheat and get different items. So it was definitely interesting. It's fun trying to figure all that stuff out, but it's a lot more fun when you can actually build it, I guess.
And the stuff that you know is dangerous or like causes issues. Like whenever you load a region or press the pause menu or something, you know behind the scenes a bunch of stuff is happening. So if you can like mash the pause button at the right time for collecting items, you know you can suddenly break times in. So there's a lot of these that you're always playing with. Same with like physics collisions and that.
It's so fun. Yeah. So there's two, like, you know, two personas really. It's one, because we talked about what are game features and mechanics that we like to do. So one is like straight D&D world building, right? It's just like create a castle, build a fort, build a base, progress, building. And the other one is taking someone else's and just tearing it down, right? You made the game. I'm gonna destroy your game, your work of art, just because you can. But that makes sense. Like it's both sides. If you can't build it, you're gonna try to destroy it, or just to see what happens. Right? It's so fun. But that's
to watch and see what it does or what you can do. Because I mean, I guess back at that point for me, especially, like I was kind of like the limits of what I could do. You know, I was like, this is as much as I understand and know how to do, and as much as I can do outside of like writing a tiny little bit of basic code that can write some text onto a screen. Like I don't know what else I'm doing. So. It's kind of pushing the limits. I think it definitely led me into programming and game development, though.
Yeah. Well, that's why people like games like Stanley Parable anyway, right? Like because if your game is just going to be a good story, you can tell a good story with a book. If your game is just going to be an emotional story, you can tell an emotional story with a movie. But with a game, it's like literally it's reacting to the player's engagement with the system. And so the most fun games, in my opinion, are the ones where they are reacting to what you specifically do. And it doesn't have to be directly, but it can be any way in which you're either changing the world or the world is changing kind of to react to you or something. That's where like games shine the most, you know?
Yeah, you nailed it on that one. I mean, movies and stories, they're really good for like, it's almost like past memories. This thing has already happened. You can't really change it or affect it, but it's in the past. And so you're like, oh, it's lessons learned, insights, emotional stories, you feel it, right? But games are like in the present moment. You're in it, you're a part of it, you're doing it. And if the game developer can think of what you're going to try to do, and especially if they can think of like weird edge cases of like, oh, there's this way, but the player's probably going to try to cheat by going around the corner and sneak around this thing. And then you can put inside there, like scribbling on the wall, the cake is a lie, you know, it gives you that sense of like, oh my God, they thought about this too. And that's where it's like that's so powerful to watch people play test and go through the games and do stuff, because then you can put those little bits of magic where people think they're being creative and clever, and the developer's like, no, I thought about that too, and here you go, and make it that kind of, it's almost like a fun, it's like a relationship you're building.
Mario Odyssey did this so well, where if you get really into that game, there's these crazy jumps you can do where you chain like 50 things at once, and there's certain areas that are like really high on the top of this like weird plinth or whatever you're never meant to get to, but players have done all these crazy jumps, took ages and got there, and then there's a little ring of coins, and you're like, damn it, the developers knew how to get up here.
Man, Mario, like Nintendo, they crush it with game design. I mean, they're really good at like fleshing through a thing and using mechanics and multiple use case mechanics, and that hat, the being able to throw the hat and all the things that you can do with it. They're so clever with taking one mechanic and finding multiple different ways to use it and leverage it. It's a very powerful lesson. I think someone broke down like the Mario first world, Mario 1, and like how brilliant that first level was to teach you the game mechanics.
Jumping over the Goomba, make sure that the mushroom goes the wrong direction so you can see it, but then you can't jump over it because you're going to hit your head, so you guarantee to pick it up. Yeah, there's a whole lot of clever loops in just that opening sequence. Yeah.
Yep. You do a sprint jump and then you hit the thing, and then you hit that invisible block that teaches that there's invisible blocks, and you go into the thing and you're like, oh God. So yeah, it's really powerful. So it's great to see. What are you guys' takes on in terms of like play testing, watching people play the games and things like that? I mean, besides forced child labor, I mean, are there any other like tips and tricks you would give to like getting feedback and honest feedback from gameplay?
I got one thing I would recommend. Like the biggest thing is watching and seeing when ignoring people what they say completely, and just watching to see if they want to keep playing the game and what percentage of the people actually want to quit playing the game versus what percent are like start to play and then they either give up before the game's even finished or before their turn level's finished, or they're just done afterwards. The best games that I've seen, like the most popular ones, when people are done with them, like they're asking often, like, can I wait? Can I go again? Can I go a little bit more? You know, can I keep playing? Even when there's like a line behind them, they're like, can I just go a few more minutes and then go? Or they're getting back in line, right? To try it out again, especially when it's like something like that in person. Now, when you're doing it online, obviously that doesn't work, but you can do it with analytics online. So you can do this. You can get the same kind of data if you're releasing your game on a demo on Steam or something else, just by implementing some analytics software. And there are a bunch of different solutions out there that are kind of like pre-built and relatively cheap, or some are probably even free. They tell you like how often the person is playing the game, like how many times each person launches your game on average, how long they play it for, like what those sessions are like. And you can add in a whole bunch of other tracking info too, to try to figure out where people are falling off in your game, to just make sure that it's not just a they're failing to even get in and start. You want to make sure they're actually playing and that they're going through the playing process and not dying out before that, because that would obviously mess with your whole stats. But you get an idea of how much people are playing, how long they're playing for, and if they actually like it and enjoy it, without asking them. Because when you ask them,
that's the worst thing you can do. It is so easy to poison the well when you're doing playtesting, because there tends to be like three categories of people. There's people who are going to kind of fumble along and are not really going to get it, and they're going to try to figure it out as they go. There's going to be people who are familiar enough that they're just running along and playing, and then there's people who will be really familiar with it, but they'll run along, stop, and then give you some feedback, then run along, stop, give you some feedback. So here's the thing. The first group of people are actually the most valuable, not the last group. The last group, who are stopping regularly to give you feedback, looks valuable. What they're actually doing is not engaging with the game. The game isn't grabbing them, so their brain is processing the game as a mechanical system, and they're not engaging. The middle group are people who are really good at playing the game, but they're biased by the experiences they have from previous games. The first group are people who have no previous biases of what they're doing, and so they're just going to be trying to figure it out. And you as a developer, and this goes for even UI design and just enterprise, it works for everything where you're making a public-facing thing. don't poison the well by actually giving them advice. If you see someone like trying to find a button, don't tell them where it is, because if you tell them where it is, you completely defeat the information you're getting, which is it's not clear for them where the button is. And you want to see where do they think it's going to be? Where do they think the thing is going to go? And same with movement. If you've got a character who's jumping against the same wall constantly, something about that wall is telegraphing that that wall should open, or there should be a door or whatever. And so the less input you give, unless they're like actually getting frustrated, you sit back, you let them do it, you take notes, and then if they actually start getting to the point where they look frustrated, point them in the right direction, and then do the same again. And you want to get as much of their raw feedback as possible.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I would add to that, like in the tabletop world, you know, you can watch when it's not somebody's turn, watch what they do. Do they check their phone? Do they look around? But if you're playtesting in a group and you've got people watching, watch the people who are watching the playtest. And are they engaging with the game just by watching the player, or are they sitting there and like looking around and I'll wait my turn. That's a cool game, but let me look over here. Is the game grabbing people who aren't even playing it just by experiencing somebody else experiencing it? And I think, and then the flip side on the video game side, I made the mistake with the Barbarian of not playtesting much at all, just a little bit, but not much at all. And to this day, one of my buddies will always talk about how he can't figure out how to get the axe out of the stump. Of course, you can't get the axe out of the stump. It's just a prop that I got from an asset pack. And there are axes in the game. You can buy them from the store, but that axe in the stump is just a prop. You can't get it out. But his first thing was to see that and think, oh, let me go grab that. And he spent like 10 minutes trying to grab an axe. And if I had seen that, then I would have been like, oh, I need to replace that prop with something else. That's getting this guy stuck. And that's, I think, the blind playtest technique is ultimately, that's the way to go. Blind playtesting, see how people react. Let them get frustrated. Let them get, you're not trying to make them happy right now. You're trying to get feedback on your game. And if they're getting frustrated because an axe is stuck in a stump and they can't figure out how to get it out, now you know you need to take out that axe, or all your other players are going to get frustrated as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, man. The point is not to make the beta testers happy. The point is to get them frustrated to the point where they almost want to cry. And then you're like, oh, turn left. That's really powerful. And it's super interesting to see, to look at that, because again, your intuition is to do the other thing. It's to go in the other direction and to like, oh, do you like my game? Do you like me? Please don't hate it. Tell me it's great. And but it's such a self-destructive pattern. Another question for you on the same vein. How do you make tutorials where you're telling people like what you're giving people information on a tutorial and you want to give them like lore and stuff like that? How do you make that not be terrible, not be a terrible experience that people want to completely skip? When there's
this is a funny. I literally so Jason's mentioned before, he's got a Wednesday meeting he does where it's people are kind of talking about their games and show it off. And there's one guy there, Evan, who's got a game he's working on, and he was kind of telling us about it. And he'd laugh at me pointing this out. He starts talking about his game, and he says, right, so I've got that. And he goes into this big lore thing, and I just had to stop him and go, I have to tell you this. This is just, it's going to hurt, but nobody cares about your lore. And this isn't to say right now, this is not to say that it won't be fun in the game. It's that no, you will never hook a player by starting with an opening cutscene or opening sequence of whatever. Lore at its best should be getting you to care about it by experiencing it. And there's even a whole big thing by Yoko Taro where he talks about how he structures his emotional stories in games, and it's specifically because you have to be engaging with it. He'll split it up over time so that you're actually playing the experience you're talking about. And so if the answer is don't, you may have all the lore in your head, but don't try to tell. And in fact, if you tell less of it, people have to piece it together. Some of the best lore in games, I think, like Portal, what sticks in people's heads because they don't tell you. They don't go, there was a scientist, his nickname was Ratman, he did what, like all of that is like there, but it's there if you're paying attention and you're like looking into clues. And people like the mystery and they like uncovering it because they feel like it's theirs. They feel like they sort of found a little, diamond in the rough in the middle of a story. So the short answer is try not to tell your story. Try to let your game tell its story just by the way people play it through. And if you want to put lore in, rather than like tell the story of the knight that died here, put a corpse there. If you want to tell the story about, some legendary weapon, like have symbols on the wall indicating some weapon, and then by the time you get to it, maybe there'd be like a snippet of somebody who was trying to find it. But you don't have to tell the story. Let the game itself tell the story.
Yeah, it's so much harder.
Yeah. I like the concept. And I don't know. I think Jason, we talked about this a bit ago that maybe there's some games that do this. I just haven't played yet, but the idea of sort of letting the player tell you how much lore they want, maybe through their actions or just through something that they actively do, like saying, do you want to learn more about this? And if they say yes, okay. If they keep saying yes, maybe you can start just revealing more stuff that isn't necessarily required for the game, but you know, some players really love that stuff and they're going to get a more rewarding experience by having it. And so maybe you could, you know, in the game, design it in such a way that those who consistently skip the lore just won't get it. They'll just get right through. And those who want to receive it will just have more opportunity.
Yeah, but the thing is, games already do this, and you've already played games that do this. The best one example off the top of my head, Skyrim. If you play Skyrim, you can just run, or you can literally pick up the books and read the books in the game that gives you the lore, and that's making it entirely optional to the player. Similarly with Bioshock. Bioshock has a particular story you can walk through, or you can go and look for all the audio cassettes, and you actually have to make a choice to click on it and listen to it and engage with it. So you can weight the narrative such that there is, like, again, there's the Bioshock is a great one for this because there's so much story there in terms of, like, there's the crazy doctor, and you just see a picture of him, and you go in and you fight him, and he's just a guy, he's a crazy doctor, goodbye, and move on to the next area. But if you walk around the area, you find tapes of people who went to see him, and you can hear his voice and what he's thinking about. And he's got this weird obsession with beauty, and does beauty have to be equal for symmetry and stuff? And you get all of this, not from the character fight, but from, like, the stuff around it. So you can choose how much of that you care about, but there's, like, lots of really interesting stuff there. So I think, yes, you can give players this choice, but it's best not to give people physically the choice, because players will always, like, they'll regret one decision or another, right? If you say, oh, no, do you want all of the lore or none of the lore? They'll go, give me 30% of the lore. That feels about right, you know? But you don't want to give them that choice. You just want to, if you put stuff in the world, they will decide how engaged they get over time. And maybe they're not engaged at the start, but near end of the game, they want to start picking up all the books, or vice versa. Maybe they want to start with all the lore and then move into the story. So you give them not only the choice, but, like, they will engage with it at their own pace, you know?
So just reflecting back then, in terms of lore and tutorial information, you want to, one, don't give it to them all up front because nobody cares. Two, you want to kind of make it more of a mystery and then trickle out the information in terms of, you want to have them experience it. So instead of telling them about the knight that was a noble knight here who died, you put the corpse down there. So you actually have them, so you go, okay, what's the lore I want to have them experience? Not tell them, but experience. And you actually take that and you place that around in places where they don't actually have to do that, but just based on curiosity and mystery, they can choose to actively go and experience those pieces of the lore, and they can learn those different areas if they want. So the question is, if you have a lore story, then you want to break out those pieces, and then you want to take how to make those into actual elements inside the game without directly telling you a long, long time ago there was a place and this was the land and here's what this is all about. And so is that summation of pretty accurate?
Yeah. Like the thing is, it can be so subtle as well. Like, one of my favorite moments in Bioshock is such a small one. It's where you're in this, I think it's Bioshock 2 maybe, but you're in this area, and it was just like you're going around and you're doing stuff and whatever, and there's occasional bits of audio logs that there was a bunch of people attacked and it went crazy. But if you go all the way around, up on the roof, you find a dead body, a skeleton, like hugging two smaller skeletons. You're like, oh, that's very ominous. I don't know what story happened there. But if you follow the rest of the logs, you find out that there was a woman who was a teacher who had brought the kids on a school trip to this place. And, like, you now know the story of what happened to them. I don't need to tell you what happened when there's, like, 3 dead bodies on the roof. But the idea is that, like, that's a really dark but interesting story that's told over the course of, you can put 2 and 2 together. There was a woman, she's a teacher, she's trying to protect her kids, something bad happens, cut to later on, you find this, and you're like, oh, okay, I see how this ended up, right? And that's some really interesting way to tell stories.
That's awesome. And you said something about there's a guy named Yukatara, or what? I'm not familiar with that.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yukatara is the guy. I bring him up because I literally just finished playing Nier Replicant. So he's the guy who did Drakengard, Nier, Nier Automata, Nier Replicant, and the rest of those. He's very known for his emotional storytelling. His big thing is that he's really, like, people. His game cult following for, like, the emotional arcs of them, because the specific way he writes his story is he wants you to experience an emotion first, and then he walks backwards to get you to that point. So he starts with, I want people to feel like they physically lost something. And so how do you get there? Well, you start with, what would they have had that they could lose? Well, and so there's, like, a famous beat in one of his older games where you you choose to do something noble, but to do that, you have to give up. The world forgets who you are. And to do that, it literally deletes your save files. So he's tied to that concept of like, no, you don't have to do it. But if you do it, if you decide to do the moral choice or the noble thing in the story, you have to feel loss as a player, not as a character. You have to engage with what I'm actually telling you is loss for your character. So he's got this kind of arc. And again, it's the same thing. He starts with the emotional arc and then works his way back to like, how do I get the player to the characters?
Oh, that's epic. If I was to Google how would I find that? Yokotaro, what would I look
so he did I think it was a GDC talk. So it's Yokotaro is Yokotaro. Yokotaro. His games are backward script writing. This is the one he was doing.
Backward script writing.
There you go.
Awesome. Oh, cool.
Yeah, I posted a link there.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. That is excellent. Appreciate that. Yeah, because right now we have one of the games that we're making is like an esports multiplayer game kind of thing. And there's a lot of information, there's a lot of gameplay, and there's also a lot of lore we're trying to put in there. But we also don't want to make people's eyes roll back in the back of their heads, and so trying to find the best ways to do that. This is super helpful because there's a lot of mechanics and there's also a lot of lore we want people to know about, but we also know, all of us being game developers and game players, you want to go skip, and then people go, hey, how do I even play this game? It doesn't make any sense, right? And so trying to find the happy balance between those things. So
I was like, that's why one of my favorite topics, and I'm not good at it, this is why I spend so much time learning about it and researching it, because it does not come naturally to me, is the level design and storytelling portion. And so one of my favorite topics is environmental storytelling, because I think that's where people have the most memories, even if they don't realize it. That's the part where a world sticks with you. And there's a lot of really funny, nuanced things that you don't think about until you start looking into it. Like if you have a building that's supposed to be some factory, and you've got a doorway that you walk into a room, if you've got a big box in that room and there's no other exit but the door you came in, people won't consciously be aware of it, but they'll be like, how did that box get in this room? Like literally, how did the huge shape through a small door? Because there's no level design continuity of like how a world makes sense. So you need to tell your environmental storytelling in a way that structurally makes sense for the world that you're doing. And if you do that, you'll find a lot of stuff happens for free. Like if you start building your world out such that the shape of the rooms and the way people engage with it and the posters on the wall, like you don't need to tell someone that this is in the 80s. You just put 80s paraphernalia on the wall. You don't need to tell somebody that this is a, dark and dangerous place. You can just have like really high strip windows, so it's very oppressive. You don't. There's all these things you can do that avoid you having to like state the sentence of this is this emotion I want you to have right now.
Hit the button. See, there's Dr. Ed wants me to talk more about the esports game. Sure. Just a quick high level. The esports game is in VR, and it's a 3v3 battle of different player types. You play as like a soldier, a healer, and like a hunter. And so they have different mechanics and play styles and play patterns. But we're also focusing on actually creating an esports game based on kindness, because most esports games, they're super fun, but you hate the way people make you feel in the game. And so we're really trying to inspire people to actually play a game, have a good time, and not create all that like toxicity inside gaming. So we're trying to create that type of experience. But a lot of that is, showing them, not telling them. And so that's kind of the focus of the game that we're currently producing right now. So
can you share more info about, like, I don't remember where you're at with sharing public links on it and stuff. Is that something you can give everybody, or you're interested, or you're not quite ready?
We're almost there. So what happened was we opened it up. We got in a tutorial. We realized that it was actually not quite what we wanted, and so we have a small group of private beta testing. So right now we do private beta testing, and so if people are interested, I can have them be a part of that. We're probably in the next couple months here going to go like open to like a full like public demo and have it completely downloadable and usable. So right now we're in private beta testing. So if you're interested, hit me up. Dylan,
where would they hit you up? I guess give everybody I linked your YouTube channel already in the description.
Oh,
but
cool.
Is there somewhere better that they could go to just hit you up or get in contact or sign up for your list?
Send me an email, Dylan at Reality Smash. Here's my, I'm gonna show my Dylan, my name, DYLN at realitysmash.com. shoot me an email, and I'll put you on the list. You just have to have a Quest headset, because that's what we're targeting. But that's what we're doing right now. But it's a cool game, but there's a lot of mechanics. There's a lot of like each player's got different play patterns. They have different weapons and specials and abilities and movements and stuff like that. And it's complex. And then we also are trying to have this other piece being taught as well, which is it's complex. So we're trying to figure out how do we teach them this, or how do we give them this information without making, doing the exact thing that I hate inside games, which is being told the whole narrative and story and design and everything. So,
well, the other one too is if you're looking at mechanics, a good way to solve that mechanically is to do the classic thing that I think Metroid is famous for, as well as so many older games do this. It's where whatever mechanic you want to give somebody, you force them in a position where they need to demonstrate knowledge of the mechanic before they can leave or move an area. So for example, the classic one is you pick up something and you fall down, and the only way to get out is to actively engage with the new ability you've been given. So you can force people to engage with the mechanics by, like, they literally have to demonstrate usage before the next thing. And that way you don't actually have to tell them. You can just sort of like leave them there with nothing else can be done except the thing you need them to do. And eventually they get to figure it out and have an aha moment. So they weren't told the answer, they discovered the answer themselves,
Got it. Okay, cool. So then it's a gate. You can't get past this gate until you solve it with, you get the key, you come across a solution, and then you can kind of gate them through these experiences, so they kind of gate it, move on to the next.
The simplest one is Mario and double jump, right? Like, you physically can't progress until you understand how to double jump in certain areas, or to get over certain, or the long jump. Like, Mario had that thing where the longer you hold, the jump goes higher and lower. And like, if you press it once, he does a small hop. If you hold it, he does a long jump. You physically can't get very far in the starting levels until you know how to get over larger obstacles. So they sort of place you in a position where the only thing you can do is play with jump until you get it. And then you're like, aha, now I get it. And now the rest of it makes sense,
That's awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, and that's the thing is trying to, that makes a lot of sense. It's just hey, you want to get over there, figure it out. That's great. Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. Dylan, do I think VR will be the future of gaming?
Yeah. What do you think? The future of gaming, is it going to take over all video games? And,
yes,
and everything's going to be VR.
Going to die. There's never going to be used for it ever again. No, man. Like,
you're just going to go to like a LINQ setup, and
yes,
nobody uses a screen anymore.
Yeah. VR is going to go away. Neuralink's going to be plugged directly into your brain, and then it's all going to go away from there. I think it's gonna be a big piece of it, right? It's like, for example, is mobile gaming the future of gaming compared to PC gaming? Well, it's just a new marketplace that opened up, right? Is board games gone because the video games are here? No, it's just a different subsect of gaming that people like to play in different contexts. So
surprisingly, they're growing too.
Yeah. VR. Yeah, VR. I mean, gaming is huge everywhere. Virtual reality is a new exploding marketplace now that the technology is good enough for us not to hate the experience, so us not getting literally sick from retching, from lack of sick stuff and all the types of things. It makes VR more fun. And so things like the Oculus store, if you look at the Oculus App Store, it blew up. In terms of if you get inside the Quest store, 1 out of 3 games on the Quest store has done over $1 million. There's been so every third game has done $1 million in the Quest store, and the Quest store has been around for not even 2 years, right? And so the thing is, it's just really hard to get in there because you have to have great, amazing content. And so
that's the asterisk I was going to say, is that I know so many people who can't get their games onto the Quest store because of the rigorous policies. Yeah. So it's, if you get there, yes, but there is a lot of gating to that too.
I consider the Quest store to be the new Hollywood. So every Midwestern person with a hope and a dream's gonna come to the land of Oculus to make it rich and be famous, and it's a big challenge, right? And you can do there, but you're also, you have to make something that's compelling. You have to make something that's fun. You have to make something that's engaging. You have to make something that people want to experience before they put it on there, because it's an ecosystem, right? And so you want to have good quality games so people want to play it more. But if you have a crappy game that you just want to get famous, it dilutes the water. And the thing is then all of a sudden that every time you play those experiences, it's gonna knock those things down. It's the best way I can explain it is like the same thing in the area of like food trucks. I don't know if you guys did the whole food truck thing. I used to own a gourmet food truck for a number of years. I made a bunch of burgers, big, over the top, outrageous burgers. I'm sure Jason can attest to. but I did it for a number of years. But what happened was really good chefs came out and they made these really good food trucks because they wanted to have to deal with restaurants. And then people go, oh my God, this is amazing. And then a bunch of entrepreneurs that weren't really chefs came in and go, oh, money grab. And they'd make a bunch of crappy food. And then a bunch of these crappy food trucks would come in and they'd park next to the good food trucks. And they would dilute the water because all of a sudden people are like, oh, I've been to a food truck. A food truck's crap. They just serve you crappy food like this. And then what happens is that the entire ecosystem gets dropped down because those crappy food trucks trying to make a buck, like, dilutes the water. Think of spammers and bots and all that type of stuff. So the same thing is true. As long as you can keep the ecosystem high quality, more people are going to flood into it. More people are going to like it. More people are going to do it. And that's as true with VR as it is for mobile, as it is for PC or any of these other ecosystems. It's you have to have that quality sense, but you also need that wild west, right? You need people to go crazy. You need people that will make a vomitorium just to see what will happen, because you need that innovation, and then people can grab that and then bring it into the actual ecosystem where it makes sense. So you need both, right? It's like the same thing with Unity. It's like Unity is amazing because you can really make anything. You can, like, in a day you can get something up and running, but you can also make super high quality content, like Population 1. That's one of the top VR titles that did over $10 million and crushed it. And there's a bunch of other games out there too. So that's kind of a long ranted thing. Is it difficult to play test the game with VR? Yes, it is. I mean, you have a VR headset on, you can't see what other people are doing. It's difficult. So the hard thing is taking notes. And that's where I told why I had the Bear app on my wrist watch, so I can actually capture those notes and say, I capture a note and go, this thing is broken here, please fix. Right. And then send that off. Because one of the frustrations is that it's difficult to see what people are doing unless you're in person and watching them. Or there's somehow you're getting direct feedback. It's very difficult. So
the other thing I use for that, because I don't have an Apple Watch, is Google. Just say, okay, keyword, remind me to add this. And then when I'm done, I just have this list of reminders that all just pop up. It's not nearly as integrated. It doesn't drop right into Trello, but it is very, very handy for when I have a headset on, or just anything where I can't do it right there and I can't write it down because my hands are full and I'm working on something. I just tell Google to remind me. Like, it drives my wife nuts because I have them all around the house and they'll like pop up on all of them. But super handy if you don't happen to have an Apple Watch or something else.
I didn't think about that. That's a good call, because sometimes my watch dies, and so I'll get those set up. That's actually a good call. Appreciate that.
Well, the other option, like I said, I've got a lavalier mic here. Just clip it onto the shirt, and you can just keep that recording while you're doing stuff, and then you can go about your day, and then take the resulting audio afterwards.
Oh, that's a good move.
Have it dictate all your notes. That could be useful too. There are a couple more. There are a bunch of questions in here. I'm just gonna pop through a couple of them before before we talk about other stuff. I don't know how much longer you've got, Dylan, but I figured I'd keep you as long as I can keep you.
I gotta play test. My client's actually in this channel and he's been watching us and he's been hitting me up to play test the game. So in about 20 minutes, I gotta go jump in with him and some other people and play. Okay. It's super fun. But I'm gonna go do that. And so that's how much time I have, but it's been a pleasure. It reminds me of the old like OCVR meetup days where we get together and we just start ranting and people just start going around in circles, right? Just that's a little. Yeah, that's great. So
well, I just keep asking you questions for as long as you're here. At least let everybody else ask you questions. Anybody's got VR stuff and other things. This one did pop up though, just about whether or not it's bad to use other developers' assets. And I get this one all the time, and Andrew, I'm sure, gets this question all the time. So I'm going to let Andrew answer it.
I would say only if you're stealing it. I mean, I think there's levels, right? Take something from Google image search and use it in some non-profit, non-commercial thing you're testing out, perfectly fine. Get something from the asset store, great. Use it and go to production with it if you want. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. The point is to make your game, make your project, find the fun, make your project. For many of us, we're not gonna be making these $1 million games today. What we're doing is making essentially prototypes that will get us to the next stage where we make those games. And when we're making those games, you're gonna get funding, so you replace all your art from the asset store with other things. So for now, get stuff from the asset store, build your library so you can build your games quickly and efficiently. When you get to the point where you got funding, you can replace things all you want and spend all your money on custom art. But for now, you're not going to get anywhere unless you've got a fun game that people want to play.
Yeah,
3000% agree. Dylan, I got 2 questions for you lined up in a row. The first was, what are your thoughts on Half-Life Alyx? But I also kind of want to merge this into what are the biggest optimization problems for VR? Because I'm sure your opinions on Half-Life Alyx will somewhat relate to all the amazing stuff that they've done and the optimizations that they must have done to make that
so
possible.
not fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
People often compared my food truck to In-N-Out, and I'm like, you can't. It's better. It's a better thing. Like, I don't want to tell you. Like, they've been around for 60 years, and you have a lifetime of nostalgia. Half-Life Alyx is an incredible game. Not only is it like this anticipation of, oh my god, we need, like, Half-Life 2, when's Half-Life 3 coming out? Also, they spent like $20 million making the game, right? They had that time. Think about that. And also, they have all the love. They have top developers. They have top people. So, I mean, it's an incredible game. If you want like an amazing thing to do, get your Quest 2. There's a new thing called LINQ, which is Oculus versions of virtual desktop, which allows you to stream your Oculus headset to your PC, or your PC's game to your Oculus headset. And you can play Half-Life Alyx with the actual wireless desktop, or with, I think with the new LINQ. I haven't tried it. It's a new release. But what you can do is you can go find a big garage space, and you can map out the area with your Quest headset, and you can go play Half-Life Alyx with the lightweightness and all the awesomeness of like the Quest headset in a big open space so you can walk around. And so that's an amazing experience if you have a Quest 2 or a Quest and you have like a PC and you can stream Half-Life Alyx. So it's a great experience. I mean, it's the Hollywood blockbuster of VR games. That's one. Optimization sucks. It's awful. In terms of having to do it, because here's the thing: as developers and programmers and stuff, we all want to make fun things happen. Oh, I click a button, the thing blows up. Oh, this. The problem is with the optimization piece, it's like you got to clean up your messy room, right? Versus putting a cool poster on the front of your door, right? You're like, look how awesome my thing is. It's like, but what about the room inside? So you got to fix things. The biggest optimization areas, it depends on what you're looking at. I mean, so you have for VR, I mean, you have it's rendering 2 views at the same time, right? So you have two cameras, 2 eyes, and that type of stuff. So you're passing that through. Also, a lot of people want to have like a PC powered on like a VR headset. And the problem is that the VR headsets like the Quest, they're basically glorified, souped up mobile phones. That's not going to be running like Half-Life Alyx or anything else unless you're streaming it from a PC. It doesn't have the processing capabilities. And so because of that, you have a lot of optimization you need to do. Geo, so a lot of geo art passes. So you want to optimize verts and textures. You want to atlas all your textures. You want to get all those types of things going. Code-wise, you want to pool. You want to pool all of your weapons and particle effects. If you have a lot of things going off, like you're shooting missiles or guns or particle effects or anything else, you don't want to instantiate and destroy those things. You want to put those things into a pool to get those things going. If you're networking code, a lot of the networking code, you don't want to have so many different like RPCs going and all that fun stuff. So you want to create like a manager script to be able to handle that type of stuff. So it's really just kind of going through that. And the best thing to really do is to just take the profiler, plug it into the headset, run the profiler, record a set of data, and then shift through the profiler data and see what you want to fix. Population 1 had to do some crazy stuff to make their thing work. They had to create like their own custom rendering pipeline. They had to create their own physics engine to be able to run things. They had to do a bunch of silly stuff in order to make that thing optimize and tweak out. And they had to go through and fine-tooth comb through the profiler to find these little tiny spikes and bumps to smooth everything out. So don't think you're going to be making like a population 1 anytime soon. They were built on the back of previous code. And so the best advice I could give is they were originally Smashbox, and they had a game, Smashbox VR, and they took that code base and then they stacked upon that to make Population 1 once they proved out that was effective. So my best advice is make the code, make it reusable, build something small and easy, and then for your second iteration of another game, use that code and leverage that code, and then just take it to the next level. That's going to be true whether you're doing VR or you're doing PC games. So that's my advice.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. You're just iterating. Go ahead.
Also, just as a side note on that, also really combine your meshes. If you're doing anything particularly fancy, you really want, like, you may not think about it, but each individual object is a separate thing. And so for a good example of this, if you played Windlands 2, it's a relatively big space that looks like a bunch of stuff. You know, I know the guys on that. They like everything is one mesh. They have an editor time. Once they've designed all the levels, once they know how they like it, they just like bake everything into one mesh, like one mesh per region blocked off by line of sight where things will be culled or whatever. But effectively, you do want to limit the amount of individual objects. Similarly with overdraw, there's stuff you'll never think about that are really bad for performance. Like transparency is a really simple thing, but if you've got multiple transparent layers, one on top of another, you get this overdraw issue where it's basically rendering the same position multiple times with new different renders, and that stuff kills performance. So be very careful. Like this whole thing, most of what you're looking at there is like 4 meshes, as weird as that sounds. It doesn't look like it, but like a lot of that stuff was placed, level designed, and then after the fact, it was mesh combined into 1 or 2 things. So that's how you can get a lot of good performance out of a VR game in general.
Yeah, just think mobile. Yeah, whatever works in mobile works in VR for you know, simplified point. But yeah, man, that's totally it's a great point. Combining meshes too. Yeah, yeah. The question is like, at what point do you go from playing prototype to doing optimization, right? And that's the big thing. If you want to try to get into the store or any of those other places, you got to optimize, and you generally don't want to have to create too many U-turns.
I like to do it along the way, like as I'm building the game, do some optimization. Not a ton, but like just take a break and do a little optimization. Or when I get stuck on something, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, just take a little break, do some profiling, see if there's anything that I can go in and optimize and fix up, and just kind of consistently do that. Otherwise, you end up with just giant nightmares at the end where like it ran great on my mega Threadripper system, but the second you try to run it on something else, it falls apart. Right? So it's easy to do that if you don't constantly. Go ahead.
Mobile headsets aren't even the same, right? Like you may think it's worked great on your Quest 2, but like, are you just targeting Quest 2, or are you actually going to have people working on older headsets? Because all of a sudden you've lost a lot of performance you thought you had, because different headsets won't have the same power to do that. So you really have to be careful. Like one of the things people don't ever think about is when a camera is strapped to your head, you can move around really fast. You can like look at stuff like this, and all of your cool and neat tricks for like occlusion culling and stuff like that don't work as well when you're trying to flick on and off entire cities of objects when people are rotating their head. So you actually sometimes want to design your games differently for VR, where you actually put obstacle blockers, like line of sight blockers, such that as you move your head, the stuff behind that can hide, because there's a big so sometimes a tree in a VR game is actually there specifically to block your eyesight to make stuff render more efficiently. It's weird. Like you get to really micro optimizations like that get a bit crazy.
I want to jump to one non-VR question real quick, because I think it's an interesting thing that I don't know if you guys all knew about and noticed, but Microsoft recently dropped their percentage take on the Windows Store, I think from 30% to 12%. I'm not 100% sure on those numbers. I think that was it. I think they were basically going down to try to match Epic and beat out Steam to make the Windows Store be something. I don't know about you guys, but like I probably bought like 1 or 2 things ever from the Windows Store, not counting the brief period when I had a Windows Phone.
And was very disappointed.
I like to look. I heard about this, and especially with Epic, they've got the Fortnite money, so all their stores have low rates, and it's for me, it's one of those follow the money things. They're not making their money off of this 12%. They weren't making their money off of 30%. They must be making their money in other ways, or they're planning for the future. Like they just want to grow, and they don't care that they're not going to make money from this. Whereas another store where their bread and butter is this 30% cut or whatever, like not Apple, but other stores, smaller stores, they can't lower their rate because that is how they make their money. That's how they get paid. But Epic, Microsoft, they're not getting paid from these things. What they want is the market share. And that's far more valuable than anything else. So in a way, especially with Epic, and this, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but with Epic's, public stance of openness and whatnot, are they really being so open by making it harder for other stores to get the best games? Is it really a level playing field if the small stores out there can't make enough money to stay in operation because they have to match 12%?
I don't know.
That's a hard thing. I mean, the challenge with the Windows Store. I mean, and I don't have a ton of experience when I've done other ones, but like is there any like great games? Because generally speaking, you go to a store or a place because of one specific title. Like you go to a restaurant because of one signature food dish that's incredible, not a bunch of mediocrity. So like the question is like, is there? And I don't know this, and so this is an open question: is there a great flagship title, a part of the Microsoft store, that makes you want to go there, much like the Fortnite, and be like, I've got to play this? Is there anything like that?
I'm sure there isn't right now. My guess is that they're going to start doing what all the companies do and just dumping a bunch of money to developers to get them to be exclusives, to try to find a few. I think the last one that I got on there was that Sea of Thieves might have been. I think that might have been on the Windows Store. And it was like an exclusive on there, or it was on one of those random stores that I don't normally use. It was one of the ones that wasn't Steam. That's all I remember. But my guess is that they want to just build that up and be like Apple, where Apple's taking a cut of all the software that gets sold on their system, or a lot of the software that gets sold on their system, and Microsoft seeing that they can just not sell the operating system, give it away for free, and then sell the software and take a cut of a lot more money. That's my guess, that they're trying to jump into that, and by undercutting it. Like if they can undercut it and offer people incentives, like there's no reason that you wouldn't throw your stuff on the Windows Store if it's easy and it's 12%. If it's easy, that's going to be the hard part though. Is like they got to make sure that the process is easy. Like Steam, it's simple as hell to just put your game on there, update it, do releases and stuff.
There's not much on the Microsoft Store that rings a bell for me either. The most impressive thing they have, I think, is the raycasted Minecraft. That's the one thing you have to use their store to get. But I think you're making a good point for why people would want to do it. But the other thing too is if you talk to a lot of game devs who've released on multiple platforms, a lot of them will tell you their biggest income doesn't come from Steam. It actually comes from like the Nintendo Store, because you've got such a smaller, more captivated audience that, kind of like what you were saying about the Oculus Store, if you get on it, like everyone who's on that platform is going to see it, and a lot of them are going to be like starved for content, so they're going to buy almost anything that comes through. I know a lot of VR devs and VR players that just buy almost literally any VR game because there's just not that many good ones that get released. So in the same way, there's a lot of value if they can pivot themselves as a new platform with a large audience that can be cheap to produce on, because they're not going to take a large cut. The problem is nobody cares right now. And so I think they're trying to pivot away from consoles and move towards being their own version of Steam that's native to Windows. It's how they actually beat out the market before with Excel and with Edge. So as much as Edge may not be the browser we're all using, they had non-compete clauses and stuff for years because they were bundling a browser with their operating system as a competitor to third-party browsers. And so I think their intent is to have a store that's built as part of your operating system that will have a game store built in. You don't even need to download Steam. And if they can pivot you in that direction as being like a default thing, then they're going to get a lot of sales that are just the nature of the fact that it's a pre-built asset store. You don't have to get someone to download Origin, which everyone hates doing. You can just use the damn asset store that's built into your operating system.
Yep. I think it's got a lot of potential there, but I'm curious. I mean, Microsoft also like starts and stops lots of things. Think of them very much like Google as like the project starter and abandoners. Like we never know what Microsoft project is going to stick around. But hopefully it grows and it just becomes another good place to sell games, I guess. They also have the Game Pass stuff going on too, which I haven't really dug too much into. The unlimited like monthly gaming plan there, and I wonder how that ties in with this percentage thing. Like, does that auto include all your games? You put them on there? Or, I don't know if you guys know anything about the Game Pass stuff.
Not much, but I will say one thing I do like about this pivot thing as well is you got to give, as much as whether or not you can say Epic have sort of sneaky practices with the fact that they're buying out devs, which is true. One thing that is very cool is if devs are being incentivized now by the producers, so they're getting money from Epic and from Microsoft or whoever to make their game, it means they don't have to do as much with in-game monetization. So structuring this direction towards like the studios pay the game devs to publish on their platforms to incentivize the platform means the games themselves can be a lot freer of all sorts of other in-app purchasing solutions. And that's a world I want to live in. I want developers subsidizing, I want publishers subsidizing developers so I don't have to through my in-game experiences. So I think that's a good direction this whole thing is going. And I think Epic started this by causing a rift and a war with Steam.
Yeah. That's very true. That's good. A good notice too, because I've seen that a lot in just game developer like discussions with producers and with funding companies. Like they either want something like this where they want to do some sort of an exclusive thing and just launch it, or they want to microtrans your customers, right? They want to monetize your players somehow. Like it's generally the way it goes. Very few places seem to want to invest because they think that they're going to build it and the game's going to make a ton of money for them. Because that's so risky and you never freaking know. Everybody wants to do something else. They have some ulterior motive that's going on.
Talk about something crazy is Fortnite trying to get around the whole Apple payment thing, and then Apple then just straight banning them. They're like, we're Fortnite, we're too big to fail. And Apple's like, dude, we got trillions. Don't mess with our money.
Yeah.
Shut them down, and then attempted, unsuccessfully, but then attempted to actually go in and remove the ability for Epic to have the Unreal platform on iOS. How terrifying is that? That Apple's like, oh, you trying to take money away from me? And then goes around and tries to shut down all of that would crush their game development platform. I can't imagine that happening. Do you think do either of you think something like that is that setting a precedence for Unity to be locked out if somebody did that, or someone else doing that? Or what do you guys' take on Apple just straight kicking out Fortnite and attempting to ban Unreal?
It seemed, I don't know that much about all this, but from the beginning, it was obviously a pre-planned move on Epic's part. And I think now we know they've been playing it for years, right? That they were setting the stage for this, which, I mean, that seems very disingenuous from a legal standpoint to be like, hey, you've wronged us now that we did this thing we knew very well that you would react to. However, taking the step to go and ban to the point where no Unreal developer could get onto the store, that's got cojones. And I have to say, for a developer who's choosing Epic as their only dev platform to now say, okay, am I putting myself in the same car as a risky driver, right? Am I now going to be at risk because Epic might do something else crazy down the line that puts my own revenue stream at risk?
Yeah. It's like the red flag when you're dating somebody. You're like, oh, there's a red flag. You're like, where is this gonna go? Maybe we should get it.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. I think it's awesome for a completely different reason, which is I really enjoy this sort of corporate blood sports because while they keep fighting each other and doing these ridiculous, see who's going to bling. While all this is happening, what they're doing is they're eroding the faith that the community has in these companies, that they don't players are now being more suspicious. They're not trusting companies single-handedly anymore. This is sort of like a great direction for gamers because it means people aren't going to put all their eggs in one basket. Like, I really like the idea that we start moving in a direction where it's like, no, maybe you shouldn't assume Steam will give you all of your games forever. What if Steam shuts down tomorrow and all of your games are gone? Maybe it's worth thinking about the fact that there's a relationship between you and a company and they're trying to make money. And I find that the more of this infighting that happens, the more that these rules are being put in place. People don't realize this, how much money that if you make a game tomorrow and you try to sell it, you are losing 70% of your revenue just immediately between publishers and platforms and all of the advertising. People have no idea how much money is taken away from your game just by existing on a platform somewhere. And so if we start eroding those barriers to the point where the companies are already making millions by selling the platform usage stuff, I'm all for that. It makes devs happier. It makes players happier. It'll be rough for a while, but I think the end result is going to be a good one for the industry.
Anarchy. I love it. Gents, you've been awesome. Thank you so much. I've got a boogie woogie. So really appreciate this chat. Jason, anytime you want me to come to one of these things again, I'd love to. This has been a joy. So pleasure meeting you, Jason and Andrew, and I'll see you guys all on the other side. Okay. Yeah,
it was great having you here, man. And everybody watching and chat and stuff, check out the link. Go check out Dylan's channel. Go subscribe and stuff, and hit him up. We'll see him again soon.
Bye.
See you, Dylan.
See you guys.
Later, man.
Bye.
Thanks again. Cool. So I wanted to jump on to some more just generic Unity stuff. without Bill in here, just talk about some random game dev stuff. But something else that I thought about that I didn't tell you guys about before that I've been wanting to do was come up with like random tips every week to just share with the people in chat, and maybe making it like, okay, there's this podcast that I listen to, and they have a tip of the week, although they don't release their thing every week, and they joke about it every week, that every time their tip of the week that comes out every other week or every month or whatever. But I've found them to always be like really useful, because they're like some cool, interesting, useful like bit of info that you might not think about, and it's really quick. So I wanted to just kind of maybe start doing the same thing here. So I wanted to present that idea to you and everybody in chat real quick, see if it sounds crazy, and then maybe we can do that later on after we talk about some other stuff. Do you guys have a minute to think about things?
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys have something. Jason's got tips, right? It probably has like a list of tips just sitting there.
Yeah, I'm not picking a tip. I'm picking the order in which are more important.
All of my tips came from Jason, so you know.
So Andrew got to go first.
Okay. So the one of the coolest things, and this is such a silly thing, but it's so cool, is Jason taught me this, that you can put color in the devlog, in the console, just by putting HTML, basically just a little carrots and color equals green, then slash color at the end. And that, it's such a small thing, but while I've been doing my coding, adding in very specific colors, whether it's magenta or yellow or something, has been tremendous, just by letting me see, catching my eye and being like, oh, there's that color I was looking for, rather than looking for a specific bit of text or something. I'm looking for the color, and if I see the color, then I know, oh, it's working, or oh, that's the wrong color and it's not working. It's just been a small optimization thing.
All right, so it kind of looks like this, where you can just put in different lines of color, or you can put in the color tags just into your chat, right? I was trying to find a good example showing it, but basically kind of like this though, right?
Yeah. I've been doing the text, but it looks like you can do the background as well, and custom icons maybe.
I didn't even see that.
There's a whole load of stuff you can do. There's even like icon codes and things, but as a general rule, just putting some kind of highlighting tag to differentiate your logs is pretty valuable.
Yeah,
that is pretty cool. That's something I never remember to do either, though. That's pretty useful. I should start doing that more.
Well, that's why, as I was showing Andrew the last day, is I actually do it via extension methods, so I don't have to think about it again. I just have a thing icon, and then it just happens every time. I don't have to worry about it anymore.
Oh, how does that work? I mean, what is the extension method doing that you're doing?
So the extension method is you put in a message and a color, and then what it'll do is it'll just automatically wrap the message with the color tag and put the color in the right place.
Huh.
Yeah.
And then there's also a color utility, so you don't have to use color hash codes, or hex codes rather. You can actually use raw Unity colors, which will then get converted to hex codes, which will then be used inside the color thing, which makes it really nice, because you can have a little debug thing at the top saying, these are the 3 colors for debug that you can actually change in the inspector that will change the color of the log throughout the course of that script.
Huh. Yeah, I'm going to start looking at that. Although, to be honest, I don't use debug logs very often, but that might be why. But I'm going to give that a try and just start trying to remember.
I don't like global logs, because I find that you end up getting to this weird scenario where everything's logging everything all of the time. So what I tend to do is I log per script. So I have a checkbox on scripts that say I log my stuff, and they're all defaulted to off. And then if there's a particular script that I want to like inspect, I can hit the checkbox, which will then log all of those scripts. And that way it keeps it very clean, and I don't have to worry about like suddenly adding 10 assets from other people, and my logs are spammed with a million different things of various stuff, you know.
Yeah, that tends to be the problem I run into with logs. They just end up getting filled. So I like that, having an actual solution for it. Cool. Well, since Andrew already shared a tip, I'm going to share one real quick, because it is the one thing that made me think of it. And it was just a really simple part of Unity that I actually talked about earlier this week in a live stream. And that was the text asset type. So anybody that hasn't seen it before, with the text asset, you can actually just reference a text file, like a JSON text file, a CSV, just a regular old .txt file of whatever you want, and then load that in Unity and reference either the text of it, so you know, like kind of have the deserialized version of the text, or the actual binary bytes of the data. You can use it to read in, basically like any kind of data file extremely easily. I think a lot of people don't know it exists, and they think that they have to, use the stream reader and then read the file in like you would if you go like just do a quick C#, like how do I load a text file in Unity or in C#? That's what you're going to find is like use a stream reader or something like that. But the text asset will allow you to just drop it in, serialize it, and then access the data really easily. So it's something I would definitely recommend people try out. Or at least I know that it exists.
I've used that for saving simple settings for an inspector script where you've got like a min max of a whole bunch of different sliders, and you're like, okay, I want to save this just in case I lose it, but also just because I want to load it in different times. So they've got the easy, medium, hard version of certain things, and so I've used that where you can just export a text file and then re-import a text file and just set the settings that way. And then that text file you can just pass around to each other too. So if you want to put it online, people can just, it's a very low maintenance, easy way of it's public, of course, but just passing around a file that anyone else using the same thing can then load into their own system.
It's actually funny because that's changed. So now that you've said that, did you know there's actually a trick that you can do that natively in Unity? Specifically what you're talking about, where you change a load of values and sliders. If you click the 3-dot menu, you can actually save out the configuration of that setting and load it back. So you can actually serialize the current configuration of a inspector in Unity.
What?
I did not know that.
Okay.
Yeah, they have this little thing for it. Yeah, I think it was added in 2019. I think.
Since I working with assets, I'm always stuck 2 versions behind. So I do most of my stuff in 2018. I think I'm on 2019.4 now, LCS. But I probably won't touch 2021 until like 6 months from now, or when somebody says, hey, something's broken. And then I'm like, oh, okay, let me go check it out. Because there's always these new things that don't work backwards. So I can't use them in the assets I produce. And therefore, I won't use them in the games I'm making. So I'm always stuck in the past.
Yeah, I'm always using the latest and greatest version because I want to try out the new features and stuff and talk about them and show them to people. It's interesting. I remember being stuck on past versions though, and it was always really frustrating. I'm sure that Jason, you probably run into that a lot too because you're working on client projects where you've got to like actually stick with an LTS version. Oh, it looks like you might have frozen up too. Oh. But yeah, I mean, I've had that a lot of the time where I like stuck with an LTS version and I don't get to play with all the new fun stuff, and it always makes me really sad.
Yeah. And I mean, there's certain watershed moments, I think, like nested prefabs that I think was 18.3. It came out, and all of a sudden, like that was the one where, all right, if you're either above or below that, you can't be. There's no. You gotta make a decision at that point. Do you want it? And if you want it, you got to upgrade. Otherwise, because everything.
Yeah, that was a motivator for me to upgrade once. That's a big one. Yeah. Welcome back, Jason. So I thought this question would be good for you since you popped up. I figured I would click the button because you're just talking about debugging and debugging options and stuff. Just talking about it on a larger project. What's the best way to manage debugging globally? Do you just make some debug bool and like enable the log there, or you want to tell them the tricks that you use?
So fun fact, I don't actually, when it comes to if it's global level logging, I don't do anything fancy because Unity does that for me. The Unity, like people don't realize this, debug.log, debug.log warning and log exception and all those. There's other tools there. Nobody ever does it though. But if you click debug dot, there's a whole load of fun toys you can play with in the debug section, including subscribing to the log messages that come in, including setting the log level, including all this other stuff. And so right there, you can literally say, you can intercept the Unity log system and then do your own stuff with it. So what I'll often do is write my own handler that will do a condition that like every log that ever hits the debug.log call goes through my code, and I will just put a little Boolean check there, and that will just stop whatever it is I want to do. You can also do it on log level, so it doesn't have to be like on or off. Usually the better option is to use an integer and have it go 1, 2, 3, 4, and that would be only show exceptions and warnings, show exceptions and warnings and general info, and then finally like extra info. And if you have this like delineation, you could say, sometimes I want it all on to see everything. Other times I just want to dial straight to exceptions and only show me the things that are exceptional. Now you can filter them inside of the view as well, but it's nice to actually have them not dispatch. And then on top of that, per script, like I said, I use specifically a decorator pattern where I've got a script that does something, and then I would compose it into something else, and that second script will match all of the method calls, but then also log messages. And that way I have a version of it and a version of it that also logs. And so I can wrap it in the logging version when I'm using the debug if directive. And then effectively, the script doesn't actually have any log messages in it, but then the script with log messages only gets instantiated in the debug version. So it'll automatically then, between debug build and normal build, strip all of the logs for me, and it's not even firing them. But then if you want them to be there, you can put a flag and turn them on or whatever. So the answer is it is complicated. There's lots of steps to it. But the short answer is just look into what the Unity logger gives you. Like, there's a lot of pre-built tools. It isn't just a logging tool. It's actually got an interface you can override. You can provide your own implementation. You can take all of the messages and send them up to a third-party logger like Rollbar or Log4net or whatever. There's so much you can do just by integrating with the debug log thing. And that alone should give you a lot more freedom. There's more you can do on top of that, but that alone would make it a lot easier.
Yeah, I think it used to be really basic when I first started using Unity, and then somewhere along the way they added a lot to that debug thing. I think the first option was just being able to turn on and off the logs so it would stop writing it. And I wanted to just mention on your log levels, another reason that they're really useful, because while you can filter some stuff in there, you can do kind of custom log levels that write out a whole bunch of extra data and then have it go into the actual .log file. So like you could have it in your game have some option that enables detailed logging that then turns on logs that aren't just like when an error happens, but like very detailed info about like what the state of data is at points that you think are important to understand and know about. So you can turn those on at different levels, and they're not the kind of thing you want to leave on all the time, because it's like insane amounts of data that's going to build up into a giant file on the hard drive, and you don't want to anger all your players and slow things down for them and fill up the drive.
Yeah, if you want to see a more detailed example of this, I have a video on the Infallible Code channel where I demonstrate a logger tool that I made, and effectively I override it's under debug.logger.handler, and you replace the handler for all Unity loggers, and that lets you write your own in-game consoles or whatever else you want to show the logs. So there's much more details in there. That's like an hour and a half of me explaining various abstraction layers and stuff.
Right, so there was a question on LINQ, and then I want to hit Jason's tips, because I know you got a whole bunch of them. So there's this question on whether or not you think LINQ is too slow for games, and I have answered this question a couple times in videos before, and my general rule for it is that it's totally fine depending on the context. If it's something that you're doing on a regular basis in an update statement, or something that's happening every frame or regularly, then I would generally avoid LINQ. But if it's something that's happening at the start of a process, or just like gathering up some data to initialize things, there's really no downside. The problem with LINQ comes with a little bit on performance, because it could technically be a little bit slower, though most of the time it's generally faster than what people tend to write themselves. But the bigger issue is just with memory allocations, because it will allocate some memory when it's doing the iterators and stuff, and just to process the LINQ statement. So if you're not doing it constantly and not doing it during runtime while you're actually playing and things are going on, totally fine. But yeah, that was kind of my thought on it. I was just kind of curious. Are you in the same boat there, Jason? Or
pretty much, yeah. I think like a lot of people don't really understand what enumerators do, and so they kind of assume it's just a complicated if statement. It is far more powerful than that. The way the enumerator pattern works, and it compounds things, and it lazy loads stuff, and it restructures queries. It does a lot of really cool and really powerful stuff that you may or may not need. And so that's why you're paying for it with garbage collection. And so to basically say exactly what Jason did, if it's a hot path, if it's an update, if it's in something that is being fired all of the time, you can usually do the less nice and pretty way, but do the same thing by doing a for loop or something where you're manually controlling every step. But if you're doing something like, get me all the children, then get the component from this, then grab this element from each of the components, I could do that with a simple select where blah, blah, blah to list. And it's nice, one clean line, and it does like 5 nested if statements in one nice, neat thing. And so if you're doing that in a start or an awake function or something, perfectly fine. So I use it a lot, but I use it exclusively when it's like gathering information for other things, not in the primary loop.
Yeah, and Rob had some extra advice there too. Just figured it was worth popping up. So yeah, you want to jump into your tips, Jason?
Sure, I'm going to be pulling these off the top of my head, so they're not like I was trying to make a list, but I'm just going to go with whatever. And so some of these might seem obvious, some of them might not be. I don't know who knows which one.
They'll only be obvious to some people. There are going to be plenty people that haven't heard them, and it'll be useful for.
Well, one great one, very simple, is the amount of times you have a game object that represents some kind of manager or system class or whatever. And oftentimes, if it exists in the scene, a great one of this, if I'm doing a test script and it's shooting bullets, like it's just an invisible dot, like a pointer that represents like the gunfire point or something. And sometimes you're like, where is it? It's an invisible thing in my game view, and I don't know where the hell the damn thing is. If you click the little icon in the top right in the Unity inspector, you can put an icon on it, and it'll draw a gizmo on that object. And so if you ever have like a manager script of some kind, anything that's like, this doesn't physically have a normal tangential thing in the scene, just put a little diamond on, this little diamond icon. And that way you'll always know where those things are. And you can even select them by dragging over them and selecting them inside of the scene view. That's surprisingly helpful when you're confused about where the fire point of your gun is, or where the spawner is actually going to drop stuff out of a container or whatever. So there's one.
Yeah. That's super handy. I wish I could screen share it right now. I don't have it up right.
What else was there? Oh, the other one is if you're ever working with UI stuff, it can get very annoying when you've got this giant UI canvas that's like living in your scene like a monolithic thing, and you're like trying to click around and whatever. You can just hit the little eye icon. If you go over to the hierarchy, there's a little bar down the side, and it's a little eye. If you click the eye, it'll just visibly disable the UI. And so it's really helpful when working with the level design, and then turn it back on when you work with the UI again. Because sometimes like trying to work in your scene with all of that stuff can be really frustrating.
Just make sure that you don't forget that the eyeball exists afterwards.
Yeah.
Or you're going to be frustrated and stressed, like, what the hell is going on? I can't get this thing to show up. Yeah, those are really handy. I forget about those a lot too. Just the little eyeball. There's also the non-selection and selection option.
Yeah, non-selection is great. Yeah.
Make it so that you don't accidentally click on objects. There are things that you never want to select, like maybe it is your game managers and you don't want to select them or something. You just click them so they're not selectable. Or what I'll often do is like do it for a whole subset of stuff, like a parent. And I'll parent down some objects, and I'll do it for the whole section there, so that I can only work with the things that I actually want to work with, and only grab the objects that I want to grab, and not have to worry about, did I grab the floor or the terrain? Terrain's a big one too. That's like the number one thing that I disable selection on, is just terrain. When I'm done working on the terrain, like it's the easiest thing to accidentally click on to turn the selection off.
Yeah. Oh, another one too, people often forget this, is if you've got a field in a script that you want to see a debug message of, you might be tempted to like make a public field and assign it just so you can read it in the inspector. You don't need to do that. There's a triple dot thing you can click on your script that'll go to debug mode, and it'll show you all of the serialized fields. So rather than like exposing individual fields just to read them, just click the 3-dot menu and switch the inspector to debug mode. That'll show you all of your fields.
Yeah, sometimes I'll pull up a separate inspector like that just has that view in there. And on that is the same thing, like don't forget that you did it, because then you'll go to like your buttons and suddenly nothing looks right, everything looks weird, and you're like, the first time you do it, you're like, what happened to Unity? Everything's broken. And like close it and restart it, trying to figure out why nothing's showing up in the inspector. You gotta switch out of the debug mode, because most of the components have these custom editors and they stop working when you switch into debug mode.
Oh, and actually, and as you said, you brought up a good point, multiple editors. A lot of people don't realize you can have multiples of pretty much every window in Unity. And so if you're trying to like move fields, dragging from one inspector to the other, it can be really damn tedious to click one and then try to drag something, but click the other and like try to fit things into different scripts. What you can do is you can click the lock icon on the top of an inspector. So click something, click the lock, and then create a new inspector and put it down. And now you'll have two of them. You can have one locked and one active, and then you can move between the active one to the locked ones. So it's a really easy way if you're like trying to marry two different individual sets of inspector items.
Yeah, you do that just by you right click on the tab and hit add inspector, right? I think that's Is that the only? Can you do it by going to window and hitting inspector?
Yeah, there's a file. There's a window creating it. There's somewhere in there too as well.
Okay, yeah, I always use the tab. I like right click on my inspector and hit add new inspector tab, and then I'll lock one and move it into debug and like drag it out, like undock it or something.
Oh yeah, and you can do this infinite times. You can have like 15 inspectors locked if you want to. I don't know why you would, but keep in mind as well, and this is another thing that people don't realize. If you've got a situation like Andrew's scripts where he's got custom inspector tooling and stuff, there is a script running that's doing a lot of logic when an inspector is open. And so the inspector itself fires an on open and on close event, then it runs a loop. So in the case of a particularly complicated inspector, that's going to slow down your engine. So you might not realize why, but if you've got multiple even if just one inspector open, sometimes the inspector will actually chug because it's doing a lot of logic to like render and draw and select stuff and whatever. So keep in mind which inspector window you have open might actually affect your performance. So sometimes clicking off of an inspector window might make your game run a bit faster when you're testing something.
That's a very good point. I've had that. Yeah. I never try to profile and do performance testing though in the editor alone. Like make sure that you do some outside too, because there's all kinds of different stuff that could be happening when you're editing that can affect it. And somebody had mentioned in chat that you can also, they've added that new show properties thing onto game objects.
Oh, nice.
You can kind of get like the pop-up inspector. It's like that when it just links to that specific object and doesn't go away. I don't think that it updates as the properties update though, but I haven't used it much myself. I think that was a new 2021 feature.
Thought Drifter mentions gizmos as well. It's good to note that every gizmo is actually individually drawable per your script. So if you hit the little arrow beside gizmo at the top in the scene view, you can turn on or off gizmos per script, which is really useful if you've got that one asset that's just like spamming your scene, or you're like rendering a whole load of light probes and you just want to turn those off so you can see what you're doing. That one's really handy as well. There's also another thing with that, which is in game view. People don't realize this. You can set gizmos on in game view and actually see things like debug draw lines in the game view as well if you want to. You just have to hit the little gizmo button on the game view window.
Oh, okay.
I didn't realize that.
I didn't either.
That's really useful for debug lines. Like if you're drawing test lines and you want to see are my raycasts working correctly, you can test, like in VR, trying to test your raycasts can be really annoying. So if you actually render the debug gizmo lines when you're testing, it makes it so much easier.
I gotta write that one down. That is awesome. All right, cool. So I learned something new today. Perfect. That is actually really handy because what I always do with those is pull up the scene view side by side so I could see my gizmos to see what was going on. I'm trying to debug things like you mentioned, like with lines for like figuring out where the path is going to be or something else like that. What usually it's like what the NPC or the AI is doing and how it's handling my code and trying to predict that. So that is super handy.
And if you're talking just debug lines, here's another fun one. If you're using the standard debug.drawLine or you're using gizmo.drawLine, you will get this really thin alias line. It's very hard sometimes to see it. If you use the handles library instead, there's handles.drawAA polyline or anti-alias polyline. You can draw an actual line where you can set the thickness, so it's a tube. And it's much easier to visualize if you can draw these huge colored tubes of different sizes in your scene view. So that's really useful if you're trying to like really debug something with lines that are hard to see, that are too small.
That's another great piece of advice too. And I think the handles thing in general is something that everybody should at least know exists, because there's quite a bit of extra functionality in there for doing gizmos related work, and just making it do things that you can't just do with the normal gizmos. If you look up any tutorials on gizmos, they'll dive into handle stuff. So you should at least know that it's something there that kind of extends that out.
Yeah, and other stuff like gizmos, I use gizmos a lot. There's a ton of really cool stuff there. Like, did you know you can actually pass a renderer to, or a mesh specifically, to a gizmo and draw a gizmo that is actually a mesh shape? So I use that a lot for, I did like a rewind time mechanic where you had a mesh and you could like save its frames. I did that, but then every frame position drew a transparent version of the actual model itself, not just a dot or line. It just looks really cool. It's much easier to see what it's doing if it's like a rotating thing and it's like you can see how the actual shape is changing as the snapshots are altered. So you can actually draw gizmos that are meshes as well. So that's a good one. Yeah,
I've done that for spawners too, like spawn points to actually just show and represent the different NPCs that could spawn there. So instead of it just being a dot, it show like an outlined shaded version of it. It'd be pretty nice.
Yeah, and well, people are mentioning that you do need to use the editor namespace for handles. That is true, but then all you have to do is put a preprocessor directive, if Unity editor this, else that. Then if you do that, you can use the handles when you're in debug mode, and they won't get they won't get sent to your build, so you'll still be able to make the build. Because if you've ever done this, you've probably seen this yourself. If you ever use a editor namespace in your project and try to build your project, Unity won't let you. It'll tell you that you've referenced something that's part of the editor namespace. So look into preprocessor directives, which are what Jason just posted, and that lets you still use editor stuff, but strip it before it makes the build.
And if it for those of us who then think, okay, I'm going to add that in 30 different places in every script I have, the second tip to that would be to create a static method. Is that correct? That does the actual drawing. So your main scripts don't have to worry about the preprocessor directive. You can just say, call my static script, and then that one says, hey, if we're not in the editor, don't do anything. And so you don't have to constantly type in if Unity editor and if in all your main scripts and make it really bulky and ugly.
I actually go one step further than that, which is I would have something like a drawer class. So it's a class that says I draw stuff, draw a line, draw whatever. And then at the top of my class, I'd create a new drawer, and I would either create a Gizmo drawer or a like fancy drawer. And then that drawer line would be wrapped in that statement. So if in Unity Editor, the drawer is the cool handle drawer, else it's the Gizmo drawer, and then I can just use it and I never have to think about it again. It's like a one-time, and any new features I add to either get supported all the way, and I don't have to ever write it again, you know?
Nice.
That's a good pattern. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I could keep going. There's loads of tips I can give.
Jason,
I don't know. Go ahead.
Well, there was and I don't know the correct terminology, but something that I was recently taught by Jason Story was using a static reference to a script, and then in the using statements at the top of the script saying using static namespace script, so that I didn't have to build in a reference to these static methods over and over. I don't know the terminology to describe that on how Google it, but that has been for me.
That's a static using statement. That's 100%. It's one of those. Nobody really knows how to do this because it's never comes up. But people are used to, you have a script and you use a using statement to basically import another script in. A lot of people don't realize that you would have your empty script and you would write using Unity Editor or Unity Engine. And now you have access to Unity Engine stuff. And one of the things you might use would be debug. Debug.log is a thing that exists under Unity Engine.debug.log. Now, you can keep doing this, and everywhere you write debug.log, 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 or whatever, or scene manager.load, scene manager.load, scene manager.load, or you can using static Unity Engine.scene manager. And now you've imported that entire class into this one. And now you don't need to prefix anything. You can just write log or load scene async or whatever else. It's loaded that entire class, the static class, into the entire script you're in. It can be confusing if you've never seen it before, so it's one of those ones I would use carefully with new devs, but like it is so powerful to save you like so much repetition as you write your code.
Yeah. It's been a game changer for me working on a new system, like an inventory system that has a lot of different moving parts, a lot of different scripts, all referencing each other in different ways. And in this system that I've been building, there's like I think 4 static classes that just sit there and do their own thing. And now I just have to do that one using statement at the top, and then I've got access to these and all the information they have. It's just been a game changer for me.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think it's good to know about. It's not something I use often personally, just because people do get confused, and I share my stuff a lot. But I think it's important to know because you'll see it. You'll see using this debug or equals debug. I've forgotten the syntax now. That's how little I use it.
Well, the one you're describing is called namespace aliases. That's different. So okay. There's using my thing equals Unity Engine blah 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 versus using static Unity Engine.debug. That's a different thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was getting mixed up there. I was thinking you were talking about aliasing them. Talking about just using them. Okay, so it's just importing in the entire static class.
Yeah, and then what it'll do is it means you don't have to prefix the class name on anything you do going ahead. It's actually like just native to the class now.
Sweet. Learned another thing. All right. All right, Professor Story. What else you got?
Well, one of them here, Jay Moore mentions that there's everything on separate canvases because Unity will update every element on each canvas. That's not true anymore. It used to be. There was a 2016 talk that demonstrated about performance optimizations, and that was one of them. But they've massively fixed that specifically because a lot of people use the animator with the Unity UI. And previously, if you did that, it would cause constant update loops to your UI rendering and be really bad for performance. But they fixed that now. So you actually can use UI animations, the animator on the UI, and it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. So
yeah, do you remember when they changed that?
that was 2018, I think. I could be wrong.
2018? Yeah, I know. I remember the talk, and I remember thinking like, "Oh man, that's like it's gonna catch a lot of people when they realize what's going on."
Yeah.
I never really do a whole lot of UI stuff or animation.
Same. I use Blueprint for all my UI stuff, but it's still good to know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that you just make the one mistake in your game and cause some serious problems, depending on your platform. Especially back then, was doing a lot of VR stuff too. So, and I think those talks were around a lot of VR stuff.
Yeah.
So, do you want to just jump back into taking more questions, or do you have a whole bunch of other interesting things?
I can either. I don't mind. I can keep going, or we can answer questions. I don't mind.
Cool. Well, yeah, we're gonna do one or two more, and then see if anybody has any big questions they want to ask about.
So the one that I keep telling people, it's like one of the biggest changes to my workflow, is just learn how to use the filtering system in Unity. Like nobody does this to the degree they should. Like people will just write light into the hierarchy to search for lights. That's fine, that works. But Unity is a lot more powerful than that. It's not as powerful as it should be, but it's more powerful than that. If you're using either the project view or the scene view or the hierarchy view, that little search bar, there's tags you can use. So if you use you can either use T for type, so you can say T script, and it'll filter everything that is a type of script, space, and then a keyword. It will find all scripts with that keyword. So if you're looking for a material that's like the dragon scale material, you could type T material, dragon, and you'll only get dragon materials, regardless of where they are in the hierarchy. So I tell people, don't think of that as a hierarchy of files. If you find yourself like navigating through a rat's nest of folders, you're doing it wrong. Like there's so much more you can do with that. And then one level above that is you can add your own labels to any file. So you can basically, in the bottom corner, this little blue icon, you can label every single asset with like, this is mine, and this has part of the UI, and this is a prefab, and this is a mono behavior. And I do that so that I can say, show me all prefabs that I've marked as UI that I wrote. And all of a sudden I have one thing I can write, and it shows me every UI component that I could drag into the scene. So I do this all of the time. Show me all scenes in my project, but that are specifically marked by me as being my scenes. So you don't get that like giant scene of every scene in every example project. You just get your scenes every time you add them. So just learn that. There's a lot of details. I'm not going to like explain the entire thing here, but just look at the labeling system in Unity. Just learn how the labeling system works, and it'll make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, I should probably use that more often myself. Like, it's not something that I use very much. I think that's just writing down.
I label all of my assets. I label everything. Like it's to the point where if you told me what are all of the interface scripts that are dealing with serialization in your project, I can go T script L serialization L contract, and it'll just bring up immediately every script that is a contract specifically to deal with serialization in my project immediately. It's really, really handy.
It does seem kind of helpful. I don't know. I'm gonna give it a try. I don't know. I wonder if anybody else does. Does anybody in chat? I'm just curious. Does anybody in chat use the labels like that, or like what % of people do? I'm just kind of curious, like how many people actually do this stuff, because I know I don't, and I probably should.
But if people mention this anyway, just as a side note, you're already using it even if you don't realize it. That little favorites list on the left that's pre-built by Unity, that is what those are. If you click on those, you'll notice the little filter gets pre-populated, and you can add your own. So I have added my own as like my scenes, my scripts, my prefabs, my whatever, and I can just click on them. And if you go one step further and use the Unity Collaborate thing, Unity will add automatic ones for you that will let you filter based on which files have been modified, which files are new for this commit, or which ones have conflicts. And so if you're using Unity source control with it, they'll actually automatically add favorite lists for you to find all modified files since the last commit you pulled down from Collab. It's really cool.
Oh, wow. Huh. Yeah, I'm going to get into it.
Yeah, I've never used that myself. It seems like one of those things that for a lot people might think, okay, well, that I got to take some time to set that up. Am I really going to get some advantage from it? It sounds like, yes, you will get advantage from it once you start using it. But it does require, it sounds like a little setup to make sure you label everything and you have your hierarchy there in your head that makes sense for your project.
Yeah, no, I mean, I go overboard. Like, I literally mark every asset that comes into my project. Like, I'll even mark all of DoTween stuff, or I'll mark all of TextMesh Pro's. So if I want to find an example of how to do something in TextMesh Pro, I can say T script L DoTween example, and I'll find every example named script by DoTween in my project. It's really handy to just like help find things like that. Or I would mark every README file as documentation. So if I want to find out how a certain asset works, I can just write documentation with Word, audio, and I'll find all audio scripts that are about documentation, or audio documentation, this kind of stuff.
So I popped up a question on inheritance and composition. This is something that I think I've talked to you about a lot, Jason, and is basically just about that. That they think we can all agree that inheritance is not as good as composition, or that composition is greater than inheritance. The order is a little bit confusing there, but the composition is better, right? And that generally, when you're choosing between when to use inheritance, which is like having subclasses and a base class where you inherit from another class, or you inherit from the base class, or composition where you add in a bunch of components like we have in Unity, where like on a game object you add a bunch of mono behavior components and then build up your game that way. So the question here is, considering composition is or like, when do we actually use inheritance? Like, considering that we want to use composition as much as possible whenever it makes sense, like when are the times that inheritance actually makes sense? And I know of a couple examples, but I'm sure you've got a couple interesting ones too. So if you want to share what you're thinking.
Sure. So just before we just slight tangent before that is, so yes, there is an argument for composition over inheritance, and composition is better because you can compose multiple things. In fact, Unity is a composition model because something is a transform and a renderer and a camera and a light. That's what composition is. A thing is all of these behaviors, which you couldn't do if you were making camera, light, movable, and that's one object. So there's a reason why that's valuable. But when it comes to individual scripts, I use it in two main ways. One of them is if there's just fundamentally most of the behaviors are the same, but you're swapping out like a couple of lines. So the abstract factory is the one they reference for that the most. But in my case, a much easier example would be like a command. So say you've written a script that's a command script, and then all subsequent commands are going to reference the same thing. So for example, I had a system which controlled cameras, a bunch of cameras, and you could switch between different cameras. You had an interface for a command, but then I had a camera command, and a camera command takes in the camera system, has all the features and functions about cameras, but then there's one line that executes. What does this camera command do? And so I would inherit camera command and do a bunch of individual ones, so I don't have to repeat all of that logic in every single one. Similarly with editors, I do a lot of editor stuff. And so rather than every editor being from scratch, I would have editor. And then if I have a camera system, I'd have a camera system editor, and it would have any camera system related stuff like how to draw an individual camera preview or whatever else. So basically, I use it anytime there is shared behavior that isn't its own system. Like you will never use the base of a camera system outside of being a base class to other parts. So it's very hard to describe practically, but the thing is, I don't design around using one or the other. This is kind of where I think there's a tangent. I don't actually aim. I don't say, should I use inheritance here or should I use composition? I extract out things. I write code and I extract a thing out, and then I extract a thing out, and I extract a thing out, and I write some more code and I extract it out. And then some things will naturally be composed or inherited. So I don't, it's something that happens through your design more than it happens as like a conscious decision from my perspective, at least.
Yeah, I think it kind of happens automatically. For me, it's just like you default to composition until you start reusing things or you're rewriting the thing, especially once I hit like the third time, when I'll start to think about whether or not I need to maybe make this into a base class. Like I'm doing the same bit of code for two separate classes that are very related. So they're doing like, maybe they're both like quest actions or inventory, inventory related, item related things that are doing something on the item, something like that. Then I'll start to look at, if this piece just fits together in a base class and I'm never going to change it or very unlikely to change it, and I just kind of want to extend and change the behavior on top of that. It's kind of like an alternative to writing a static helper method. I think that a lot of the time when you're doing this, like the other option or the thing that people will fall into is just writing like a helper dot whatever, do this thing with this bit of data. A lot of the time that could actually fit better as a base class in some inheritance, I guess, is kind of like where I generally put it. So and UI elements are also another big common one, because something that always kind of shares very common functionality. You might do things a little bit different, but in general, a button is going to be a button.
Yeah, it really just comes down to the scenario you're in. Like this is the thing I've said before, is I don't look at code that way anymore. I used to look at code as this thing of like, how do I use a particular get function here, or do I use a set, or do I abstract this out, or do I use inversion of control here, or is this but like it shouldn't be a case of applying tools arbitrarily to your problem. It should be a case of like, use the code. If it's getting unwieldy, just extract a bit out, do some more work. If something is, complicated, make it simpler. And like a lot of these design tools are things that, like, there's moments when they're obviously beneficial. Not always, but like there are moments where you're like, oh, well, if I do this now, this will make this easier. And you're better off, rather than like trying to resolve when to use each and every tool, to just work on your code and try to make it better for you every time you do it. If you just stop and ask yourself, ugh, I hate that I have to go and copy these 5 lines from here to here, stop and go, oh wait, maybe that's a hint. Maybe the fact that I had an instant gut reaction of, ugh, I didn't have to copy this code, maybe I should do something about that problem. And so a lot of these things can be resolved not by, should I use tool A or tool B? It should be, use one, and if it starts annoying you, if you start disliking your own code base, you're like, oh, this is so tedious, I have to do this thing, stop and go, well, maybe if I try it the other way, maybe that's a better approach. And you'll find you'll just learn which ones work well by like doing it, rather than trying to academically solve the problem.
No, I think that's great advice. Just getting it in there, trying it out, and then fixing the actual problem. Like basically iterating on it instead of trying to pre-guess exactly what it should look like and how it should be. And I do the same thing when the code sucks and it's a pain in the ass to work with. I think, okay, I'm either going to stop working with it and ignore it and delete it, or clean it up and change it and refactor it so that it's not a pain. Unless it's something that I'm going to use it once and I'm again going to stop using it and just not do it anymore. So I think that's great advice.
Like a great example, like if I was building a weapon system and I had a really cool gun, like I built a gun script, did a cool gun thing. I'm like, cool, now to make a second gun. Only this one's going to have lasers and heat-seeking, whatever. And I'm like, oh, how much of my gun code am I going to have to copy over before I even start this? So it's like, well, what if I could extract out the common parts, make them both extend from gun base, and now it's like, aha, now I can just write the one bit of code that's different. And then as you start to go along, you'll be like, oh, now I want to have a gun that has some of those features and some of those, but that's a base class. I don't extend the whole thing. What if I take this portion, turn that into a composited feature that I give both of them? Now I can use that somewhere else. And so, like, I would probably start by taking a thing, then inheriting, and then splitting out components, and then composing the component. So again, it's all about solving the problem. It's not like sitting down and choosing one or the other,
Yeah, and there's a comment about deep inheritance too. So when we talk about choosing one or the other, I would say that you definitely don't want to choose many levels of inheritance. This used to be a very common thing back in the day. When I started programming, when I started at a real AAA company, the code was like 8-10 layers deep, of inheritance, down to the actual like network object that's moving along, and like all these levels up. And then you run into the problems of like, one of the splits. Well, this was like the one that really kind of hit it home for me, was in our games, almost all of them, an NPC and a player both inherited from like an entity or something similar. They'd be named different things in the different games. It'd be an entity, and then an NPC and a player would inherit from them. And then an NPC and a player could do different things. And things that would work on a player didn't work on an NPC, and things that work on an NPC didn't work on a player. And the things that did were often just copied code. Some of the stuff would get pushed down to the entity level, but very little. Most of it was at that higher level. And then you ended up with like subclasses on top of the NPCs doing more stuff. And it just ends up being very difficult to reuse your functionality and to make things work. You end up with a lot of hacky stuff when you're getting into multiple levels of inheritance.
And what you're describing falls squarely into, people always want an example of what Liskov substitution is and exactly why it's it's the most confusing named, certainly, of all of the solid principles. Well, that's a prime example. where conceptually you could say a player and an NPC are both entities in the world, but for all intents and purposes throughout the application, they're not actually going to act the same. And so one of them cannot be logically substituted for the other. In the same way that a square is a shape and a circle is a shape, you could technically make them both shapes, but if all interactions with square are going to involve the area and all interactions with circle are going to involve radius, you're getting into like a weird, are they actually the same thing at all? Maybe they're different kinds of things, and maybe I'm just conceptualizing them wrong. So that's a very good example of the Liskov substitution problem.
That was definitely the one that hit it for me, and dealing with all of the problems that came with that, with trying to do all of the player related things to NPCs or NPC related things to players, and just the difficulty that came with that, and the mess of code that results from that. I mean, there are definitely some positives and some benefits there and reasons that the decisions are made, but it's definitely I prefer composition as much as possible.
Oh, and actually, that reminds me. One other thing on that topic you're talking about deep linking and on the deep inheritance. People don't really realize how deep their inheritance already is. So let's say you're making your very first script. So you've made a brand new empty project and you've just written my script, hello world. Your my script is a mono behavior. That mono behavior implements from behavior. That behavior implements from component. That component implements from Unity engine.object. That Unity engine.object implements system.object. So you're already 6 layers deep on your very first line of code in your very first Unity script. So there is already a lot of inheritance coming along. And that's why when people say, do you use mono behaviors? Why do you write these scripts outside of it that are small? It's like, because every time I write hello world in a mono behavior, I'm implicitly saying it's like the whole kitchen sink thing. I'm including everything that's in that hierarchy chain. And if I'm writing like, if gun has ammo, shoot, do I need renderers and get components and transform information and all this stuff? And all of a sudden debugging is harder, working with it's harder, all this extra confusion when I just wanted 5 lines of code. And so I write 5 lines of code, I could then instantiate that somewhere else and I don't have to work with this whole chain. Although even if you do that, a standard class still implements system.object. So there's already 1 layer of hierarchy in everything you do for your inheritance. It just comes down to like how many you have. So yeah, there's already a lot there.
Yeah, it's weird. You realize that if you want to actually dig into that too and see it, just click on the base class and hit F12 when you're in the editor, and it'll take you right down, and then you can go down and down and down and down to start to see how deep some of the hierarchies are. You can do it on some of the other Unity classes too, like some of the components that are in there, and you can see how they've actually used inheritance to build up some of those structures, especially I think on the UI components. I think it's quite a bit deeper hierarchy if I remember right. So yeah.
I think it's not even just the Unity stuff too. Like people are used to UI, Text Mesh Pro, UGY thing that implements TMP_text, which implements, I think it's something else, and then it's text, and then it's it goes down more layers as well.
Which is why I always use TMP_text when I'm referencing things. That way I don't have to decide which UI type it is, and I don't have to change it out because everything I'm going to use is on that subclass. Nothing is on the or on the base class. Nothing on the subclass.
That is also a perfect example of when I actually do use inheritance. So it is an unfortunate truth that the way Unity serializes things is it needs it to be a Unity engine. It needs to implement from component to be placed onto a mono behavior or onto a game object. So all things that are placed onto a game object inherit from system Unity engine.component. So that's everything from transform to rigid bodies to all of it. All of it is Unity engine.component. And so everything needs to be. And so if you want to have the ability to drag and drop scripts across your different things, they need to at minimum inherit from that component object. And so sometimes if I'm making a script like a mono behavior and I'm doing like a spawner and I'm having like wave spawner versus some other kind of spawner, they both inherit from spawner, which would inherit from mono behavior or something, so that I can drag it around in the inspector, because then I can interchangeably drag 2 different types of spawners into the same slot in a mono behaviored object reference. So just like that, like TMP text lets you drag either the 3D one or the UI one, because it doesn't matter as long as they both extend from the same base class. So I would sometimes use inheritance there to allow myself to interchangeably interact with 5 or 6 different things that all have conceptually the same contract, but I still want to be able to play with it in Unity, as opposed to like having to instantiate objects in some other place, you know?
That makes sense. I've done that too. Because I wish I could just do it with an interface. It'd be nice.
It would be nice, yeah. But I understand logically why all of the serialization issues would be hell if they tried to figure that problem out.
No, I get it. But yeah, that's definitely another use case that I've actually done quite a few times myself. So, cool. So let's see. Get VR with Andrew. Anyway,
Not this Andrew.
Yeah, I was must
different Andrew.
Yeah. Cool. So just kind of going through chat and stuff, seeing what other kinds of stuff pops up. So there's a lot of code related questions and stuff. But
yeah, we talked to Andrew actually on Infallible Code. We did a podcast with him. He's a cool guy.
Oh, cool. Just have to check it out and talk to him sometime. One of the things I wanted to mention and kind of get Andrew back into here too was after this video, I have a premiere of a video coming up on using assets in AAA games. So just talking about the process of actually using game assets, what that's like, whether or not people actually do it, and kind of like the real world scenarios that I've seen for using assets and other people's art, and not just art, but mainly code and middleware type stuff in AAA games. So I already shared the premiere down below so everybody can go queue it up and stuff. But I wanted to just kind of bring that up to you, Andrew, because you work a lot with assets and stuff. And I assume that you see big games using some level of middleware and assets and art and stuff too, quite a bit. Although I'm sure 99% of it's going to be indie developers because they don't have the giant budgets and not building their own stuff. But I'm sure you see it some in some of the bigger companies too. I was just curious what your thoughts were on that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I would surmise that most AAA studios are using literally asset store assets. Like they go to the asset store and they purchase assets. Visual assets, far less than tools. And the simple fact is because they're on a budget, right? They know how much their devs cost, and they know that they could create any given system or something, right? But if that's going to take a senior level dev 2 weeks to do, that's going to cost them a certain amount of money. That senior level dev could probably get the asset from the asset store and figure it out and implement it in a week, day or two, and then they would save who knows how much money and time. So I'm sure for a fact that AAA studios use assets, but they're going to be using mostly tools. Although, and I wish I remembered the example, there was some somewhat large RPG, I think it was, that had asset store artwork that they kept all in the background. So they had prototyped with asset store artwork, and some of the stuff they were like, well, it looks perfectly fine, and it was all in the background. So unless you really were paying attention and knew what the asset store artwork looked like, you wouldn't really notice as a player. But those who have been around for a while and have seen the same stuff as more hero art in some games would probably recognize, oh, wait a minute, what that pillar way back there, I think I've seen that before. And it's just because
right about the hero. You are about the hero art thing. That's a little asterisk though, because there are assets that you can use. You can use a collection of rocks anywhere. It doesn't matter. Like a great example of this is Quixel Mega Scans. It's an entire library of scanned assets that looks amazing. Yeah. You don't know this, but you've seen these because they're in Metro Exodus, Destiny 2. Like these scanned assets that you can get for free on the Unreal store are used in games you're playing because they're just like a huge library of photorealistic stuff, and nobody's going to stop and say this photorealistic rock looks like this other photorealistic rock. I'm very annoyed. Like so nobody cares. It's very different if you've got like a specific spider boss that's exactly the same model in 3 games versus like trees and rocks and that kind of stuff. So the hero asset thing is a big deal.
Yeah. And certainly for the prototyping, I'm sure large studios have their own asset libraries that they've built up through the years. But if they've got a small team prototyping new game concepts or something, they're not going to care where the assets in the game come from. What they care about is whether this prototype is going to bring them revenue if they were to invest in it. So the faster they can get a prototype working to the point where they can say yes or no and test that prototype out, they're saving money and time and gain faster to their next major release.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like Jason was saying, as long as the art matches in the game and you can't tell, then a lot of the time there's no need to swap it. Things like rocks, tables, furniture, all that random stuff. As long as it matches, the rest of the furniture, the rest of the stuff in the game, you can kind of mix and match and use some of that stuff. A lot of the stuff that I saw people use though was less on the art and a lot more on the like tech side. Things like physics engines, like using actual physics projects, or Speed Tree, the huge one. That was the first time when I learned what middleware was and what assets were. It's like, oh, what is this Speed Tree thing? I've seen it pop up in other games before, like in the beginning of it, working at a kind of like, oh, that's what this is. Like, this is actually just like an asset that's making all these trees look cool, and we don't have to do anything. Or we don't have to do much.
I mean, a perfect example of this is audio middleware. Like, nobody writes their own audio middleware anymore. Like, nobody. You're either using Fmod if you're an indie, or Wise if you're enterprise. That's it. That's the only tools you're using. You're not using anything else. If you're trying to write your own audio middleware, when you've got this amazing cross-platform tool with tons of skilled audio engineers that know how to use it, you can just hire a studio to do it for you. Like, so middleware is amazing if you're using it in the right places.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a big way to speed stuff up and not waste your time on all the extra stuff. I was thinking the audio one's great. I was thinking of video too, like the video players and stuff. Nowadays it's quite a bit easier, but even before in Unity, you just grab external plugins to play video in Unity, because you want to play video. You could either spend weeks or months building up a solution for it, or just have somebody else do it for you. And I don't remember what it was like in Unreal, but we were using third-party stuff in there to do video playing too back in the day. So, I mean, they're useful everywhere. Assets are huge time saver, and I can't imagine like building games without them. I know some people prefer to build totally from scratch, or at least as close to as scratch as possible, because you're still using a game engine, you're still using the packages, and a lot of those packages, I need to think about like the visual scripting system, like that used to be an asset, now it's part of the packet or part of the engine, or the Text Mesh Pro, another really big one. So a lot of things like they brought into the engine, and you're still using them.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key things I see all the time. People saying, and even in the chat in these past shows, people come in saying, "Oh, is it okay to use other people's stuff?" As someone asked earlier today, actually, is it okay to use others' assets? Yeah, I mean, if you're using Unity, you're using somebody else's asset. You didn't build that game engine from scratch, and even if you did build a game engine from scratch, a lot of the stuff you use to build that game engine is not something you built. I mean, it's a rabbit hole you can go down. I think there was a documentary once about someone who tried to make a toaster from scratch, and he just couldn't do it because you can't make a toaster from scratch.
You gotta go mining the minerals and stuff. I saw that
exactly one. Yeah. So the concept, somehow there's a disconnect in people's minds. I think it's probably logical that, hey, if I'm using Unity on the Mac OS or the Windows OS, that's somehow okay. But if I then download this one little plugin that makes it do something slightly different, oh, now I'm not doing it myself. Am I really a game dev? Am I really doing it? But yeah, of course you're doing it. You're making use of the tools available to you. Your end product is yours, regardless of really how many helpers you had. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants in this world. So let's acknowledge that and make use of it.
I'll put probably a dangerous opinion to say here, but I think this is an experience thing, because whenever you first start using something like Unity, you draw the line of what I can do and what I can't do. You might be at a stage, I can't make my own game engine. That's beyond my capabilities right now, but what I can do is write scripts. And so from now on, everything I can do, I should do because I'm able to do it. And that sounds like it makes sense, and I'll build my own game, and I get to write every single line of code and customize it and be great. But if you step back for like a split second and go, why are you doing? If it's a hobby, if it's to learn, go for it. If it's the whole point is to learn, then you're achieving your goal. If your goal is to make a game or to sell a game or to do, and like if you're hired by a contractor to do something for them, ask yourself, like, other than personal pride, is there any value in you spending 3 months building a particle system for them when you could just use a particle system? Like if that gets you immediately to the goal that you need. And so the more I worked with more clients and the more jobs I had and the more stuff I needed to do, I realized that a lot of my arguments against assets were like ego. It's like, well, I could make it myself, so I guess I should. It's like, no, like I don't have, like, think of it, if I charge myself how much it would take me to do that in terms of time and effort and research and whatever, to do it the way I want to and be happy with it. It's like, I'm basically choosing to work on something and then not pay myself to do it, which might cost me the equivalent of 1,000 or 2,000 to do it, or I can pay 100 for an asset and go, holy shit, that's so much cheaper than what I would charge me to make it to myself. So why does it not, like, it makes no sense to me. And I can understand people's arguments against models, because models look so distinct. But even that I would completely push back on, because if you work at any level of scale, the amount of times we've worked on projects where we've bought the assets off the asset store and just thrown the textures away. Nobody knows. If I showed you a tree in a game and I showed you another tree with a vastly different texture on it, you'll have a hard time telling the difference. Like, it's not so many assets, unless they're like a very specific cartoonish boss or cartoonish enemy, like even a zombie or whatever. They're going to be, it's a shape of a human. How many like, you know what I mean? It's like saying, oh, it's a human shape. Then they all look the same, right? No, they clearly don't, right? So models are the same. You can take 90%, like walls and banisters and staircases and all of the environmental stuff and rocks and even animals like wolf. For example, the wolf in the first tree, that one, the Whaley game, like that looked like a realistic textured fox on the asset store, and he completely repainted the texture. But it doesn't look anything like the fox that he originally uses that demo for the asset. Because it doesn't matter. It's that he needed a fox-shaped thing, and just because he took a fox-shaped thing doesn't mean that it's like, oh, it's an asset flip. He just used that shape and then painted the texture to match his environment. So assets are fine as long as you actively engage in matching your game with it, or you use it as a base plate for something. Just don't wholesale drop stuff very visibly the same thing. So like, I don't understand this mentality of like, I'll do everything from scratch unless it's a game jam or for learning. If you're doing it because you're trying to sell a game, all you're doing is adding an extra 5 years of weight to your own work to learn how to make and do stuff, which you could be making a game, selling it, moving on to the next game, making that and selling that, you know?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Totally agree. I think there's a comment in chat too that kind of highlighted like the real challenge is making a fun game, and nobody really cares how you built it. They just care that the game is fun. I mean, honestly, like when the game is done and shipped, nobody cares what the code is like. Nobody cares what it looks like under the hood, how many different packages or other things you use, just that the game works, it's fun, and it's popular. I mean, that's really what matters, and that you get it done. Because I find a lot of the time when people do that whole building things from scratch, constantly creating things, they never get it done. Like they're never finished, right? They're always in this constant loop of it needs to be better. It needs to be better. I'm going to just add a couple more things. And it never actually gets finished and released. So I would say it's a mindset to break out of if you can. But I've been in that boat before. It's not like I haven't done it before. Like,
yeah, like I spent years doing that. Like, this isn't me just saying, oh, it's the obvious right answer. I said it's the right answer after doing contracting and development and work for like 12 years and learning that this is not the best use of my time. And to your point about making the game fun and stuff, I think this is really frustrating for me from the game design sphere. Is there's so many courses and videos and things that teach you how to write the code that shoots a rigid body, or how to do a thing that plays some audio. But so many people focus on that and think I have to write all of that code myself, but they don't understand the effects of architecture on their game design, or how lighting can be used to draw leading lines, or how do you construct a puzzle? How do you actually do the steps required to make an engaging puzzle for a player? Or how do you write narrative that isn't completely obvious, that actually has, you know, environmental storytelling? And how do you have character dialogue that sounds organic to the situation? Like, there's a million things to learn about games. Sound design. Do you use leitmotifs? Do you know what leitmotifs are in games? Like, these are so many different topics that are way more important to the kind of vision of your game than like, did you write the right line of code yourself, or did you write the serializer yourself, or did you write your own, you know, I don't know. There's so much more important stuff to making a good game that like is out there to learn, that is way more better use of your time.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like anything that you can offload to just get it done sooner is better, and start getting the feedback. There was actually a question directly for you, so I figured I'll pop that one up, Jason, about how do you know like what asset to actually look for? So say you're making a game, how do you just pick, like how do you figure out that these assets exist and like know like that that's a thing you should go search for? that there's a solution to your problem already. And
well, like, you put the nail on the head there. The answer is problem, and I think this is a lot of people kind of look at it as that they'll go to the asset store and they'll download like 50 assets and go, cool, I have a project now. It's like, well, don't do that. Don't start with the presumption of just dumping every asset you've got. Make an objective. I want to make a Skyrim-looking environment. Step one, what do I need to do that? Well, I need whatever environment that looks like Skyrim. Then start your search. Now, if we're specifically talking about tools like pooling managers, well, then you probably don't need one for the first huge chunk of developing your game. Make the bullets, make them shoot, make them fun. Oh, hang on a second, it's a bit slow when I've got tons of bullets. I need to optimize this. How do I optimize bullets? Google it. Pooling, cool. So pooling is the answer. How do I apply pooling? Google it. Oh, look, there's a pooling solution on the asset store. Maybe I use it. It's like, cool, this kind of does what I need to and makes it easier. I don't really understand how it works. Maybe I'll do another search, find a tutorial, learn how it works, and maybe even make my own. But that's the order. You start with, I have a problem. You then Google how to do it. If it's something that can be done, find an asset that does it for you, solve your problem. And if you have time or you're on a second project or it doesn't do everything you need, then revisit it. Great example of this. I worked on a client project a couple months ago where I had to do object recording. I had to basically like record a playback some objects that were moving around in the scene. First thing I did, Googled it, found some assets, found an asset that did a recording thing, dropped it in, worked great. And then the client came back and said, oh, actually, this doesn't work for what we need because we want to save it out in a particular format that's being fed through UDP to some other system and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, this system doesn't give me that. So now I make it myself. So now I learn and I go through it. But I don't start there. I don't start by like, if the problem is they want to see it work, I can make it work in a week or less just by grabbing something off the asset store. And then if it doesn't do everything I need, I can then go back and start to apply the new things. So that's the answer, is you don't try to find the assets. You find a problem, you solve it by Googling and finding an asset. And then if that stops working for you, again, even audio, I would start a project with Master Audio. Master Audio is great. It plays sound effects, plays music, does what I need to. If I was scaling that project further, it would stop doing what I need. I would then switch to Fmod. Like, I don't start at the big answer. I start at the thing that solves the problem I have, and I would then slowly increase it as the difficulty or complexity increases.
I find, yeah, that as you know, with my level of coding skills, I acknowledge now that I'm going to be taking 2 steps forward and then 1 step back in order to fix what I just did. And I'm happy with that because it gets me to the finish line faster, because rather than just, you know, slapping everything together and saying it's got to work, I know that it's going to break. I know that I'm not doing it right. So I will do it so it works, knowing that my next step, once it works, is to go back and figure, how can I make this better? How can I make this more in an architecture that doesn't isn't going to shoot me in the foot later on? Can I make this just better overall? And one of the mistakes I used to make was to not do that, was to say, okay, this does this, this does this, it works, I'm not going to touch it, right? And then, you know, a week or two later, I find out, oh, there's something else I want to do now, and now I have to go back to this first script, remember what I was doing, and then think, oh, now I need to fix this and this and this and this, and all these other things have to be fixed all at the same time, rather than having taken that step before and really thought, okay, it works, how can I make it better?
I lost my train of thought there. I had, yeah, I think I was just listening to you guys. Yeah, that's definitely good stuff, man. There's another question though on MVC, and I don't want to miss this because it's something that I made the mistake of pushing very, very, very heavily. When I did a transition from web development back into game development. So I'd done a bunch of game development, took a little break, did some web development, really fell in love with MVC. Well, it was I'd already used MVC before, but I started liking MVC and MVVM even more, and started really trying to force them into my game. And I'm curious, because I know you do a ton of enterprise stuff, Jason, how you feel about this MVC or MVVM, the model view controller, model view model, for anybody who's not familiar with them. They're C#, very common, like C# and JavaScript type terms that you'll hear a lot. So is there something that you, like a pattern that you definitely use or recommend, or do you just like what would you go with?
First thing first, this question is something that I get often enough. I've specifically written a blog article to answer this question because it comes up often enough. This isn't going to specifically say the correct answer, but it's going to tell you what that question means to me. So I call this one the question behind the question. So when people ask me, you know, how do you apply UI logic separation, or how do you do MVC or whatever, that's not the question I hear. And without going into it, you can read the article, the thing in particular. But effectively, I'm just boiling down that there's the fact that you're asking the question tells me more information than me giving you an answer will. So reading this should hopefully tell you why I'm not going to correctly answer that question for you. So there you go.
That's a very fair point. Cool. So yeah, I linked that in the chat too, so everybody can go check it out. I remember what I was gonna say a second ago. So on your point of having a problem and solving the problem, I was gonna say I think that that's also the best way to learn. Like the best way to actually learn game development or programming, or especially programming in general. Like having an actual thing that you want to fix or solve, like some real life, real world problem that you want to solve, will drive and motivate you to learn to code or learn to do these things. I think a lot better than just about anything else. Or definitely a lot better than like just forced instruction. Like if I've had cases where like I had an actual problem with most of the time in my experience it was with a game that I was playing. I had a problem with a game that I was playing and I wanted to find out if there was a way I could do something with code to fix the problem. Some of the simplest ones were like I'd have a game where like the whole game would lock up and I couldn't do anything. The screen would go black. Couldn't do anything. There's no way to kill it except for restart my computer. Had a G15 keyboard and I was like, hey, I could still use this little, I can use this little dialogue thing here. It's the only thing that works on my computer. Nothing else works. Maybe I can use this to have like a recovery button to fix this and kill the application when it happens. Learned how to code, learned how to use the interop stuff with it, and learned how to use the API there. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, and it's actually not that difficult. And start like building up. I've seen people do it for like their DVD library as like a simple old thing.
Yeah,
like
I did it for my audio swapping. I had multiple audio devices and it was really annoying switching between my speakers and my thing. So I built a little tool that could read a keyboard shortcut exclusively so I could switch between different mics and different setups. I don't use it anymore, but I used to before there was a tool for me to do that with now.
Yeah, it's super handy. It's a great way to learn. Like just building something that comes in handy, like that can help you do something useful. For me, it's always been stuff like that. Or like when I played MMOs, one of the things I really wanted to know is how much damage am I doing? Who's actually doing the most DPS? And I like, well, I can read the logs. Like maybe I can learn how to make some kind of a parsing thing that figures this out. Like it's just adding in division to figure out damage per second. So maybe I can do that. And over many months, figured that out. And that actually kind of helped me in getting into the game industry at first. Like building that was something that I could talk about when I was in interviews, like as a thing that I had done that was somewhat related and relatable and made sense. And it also really gave me experience in writing code, writing useful code that actually solved the problem. So.
And that was my comment before about game sharks and stuff, is like just learning how to like read the values of data of your game and how to mess with mods and like learn how to make a Minecraft mod. It's so easy. Like back when I was doing it before, it was this painful mess of you have to use this Minecraft mod kit and it's a specific like decompiled SDK. But these days it's really simple. You can just make a mod, drop it into a folder, and it'll just work. As long as you build your jar file. So this stuff is like very easy to do these days, and you'll learn a lot about how games work just from playing with existing ones.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea too. Just doing the modding for anybody who's not already writing their own code and building their own games and stuff. Like doing some modding in games is huge. It's one of the ways that I started. One of the first things I did, because you can actually get like a real payoff right away. Like you make a mod and your thing happens, and it's in a game that's already fun and already cool stuff is happening. Like you're writing code that impacts things that aren't just your terrible demo of a game when you're first learning. So I highly recommend it, and that's what my now 13-year-old does all the time, writes mods and little things for his games or even for his Discord server, writing bots and stuff because they come in useful. And I see it when he does it, it just keeps learning constantly. He has these little problems to solve and then starts to search and figure out how to solve the problems. And there's so much info and connectivity out there now that you can pretty much find the solution to anything if you're willing to put in enough effort and just sit there and keep searching until you get it, and keep trying things.
And it's actually the kind of it's tangential to that, but to bring it back to what we were saying before. Speaking of that blog post that I wrote a couple of them, and one of them was very similar to that, which is I try to explain why I don't teach design patterns anymore, and it comes down to what you're saying there. Is I find that it sets a bad precedent for how you should reason about problems. So there's a second article there that you might get a kick out of that if it's like, this is more my history of how I got to where I am with coding, some of this earlier stuff I did. So that's just effectively me talking about design patterns and why I think I wasted a lot of energy thinking about design patterns that I probably shouldn't have done. So that's just another thing to look into. But it basically, it's what Jason is saying, that you learn the most from doing, and if you think you can find like the exact answer online and paste it into your code, it'll be harder for you than if you try to solve the problem. So
yeah. Go ahead.
I do that with there's probably an official term. I would call it for myself like sort of proactive coding, where in that process of refactoring and actively thinking, how can I make this better? But also, what happens when I change this? If I do this a different way, like what are the different ways I can do this little thing? This one, often it's one very specific little thing. How does that change the rest of the way things can interact with that one thing? Like sometimes I can make a code much smaller, but suddenly I don't have access to one tiny little part of it. And I'm like, well, no. Later on, I'm probably going to want to access that one tiny little bit. And if I block it off here so I can't access it, then I'm going to shoot myself in the foot. So I sometimes won't refactor things super small, super tight, because I want to keep that door open for the future. And I think that for me, that just helps me understand probably design patterns without knowing design patterns, because I'm starting to figure out things and how they interact with each other in new ways for me that, I might not really make that connection if I were reading about it or doing it in a different way.
And this is really funny to me, is because I've been doing this for long enough now, and I've tutored, I've trained people, I've been a consultant in companies. I have a sense of people's ability from not just the code they're writing, but I can see how they're processing problems. And it's very funny because I have a good idea of how people are working around things. And one great example of this is there's certain problem spots people will hit. And one of the big ones to me that's like a very big indicator is when people start doing downcasting. So this is a different stuff from your stuff, Andrew, but it's specifically, I see this a lot where people look at design patterns and go, oh, they're using loads of interfaces. So interfaces must be the magical glue that makes design patterns work. And so I'll just throw interfaces at everything. And then what they do is they hit a problem that you're describing, which is, wait a minute, I had this thing called cool orc spawner, and now I've cast it down to spawner. I've lost access to all of the features that I had. How do I get them back? And then they start casting it back and defeating the entire point of design patterns. And that to me shows a fundamental misunderstanding about the relationship between design patterns and what they're solving. And that's why I don't like teaching them, because people look at it as practical code and go, oh, I'll just drop this solution in, but they're not trying to solve the problem. And they'll often find, they'll come back and say, oh, design patterns make my code more complicated. It's like, it does if they're doing it the way you're doing it, which is you're just gluing them in without really thinking about what they're for. So I definitely see that in terms of, it's fascinating to me how many people follow a very similar trajectory in their learning. Like I can see they've just started learning, they're really enjoying coding, they're trying out new things and the way they're approaching stuff, and now they're getting frustrated their code isn't as good as it needs to be, so they start researching how, they start getting overzealous, and so they start applying all of this stuff they find online but not knowing how it's working, and then they start getting frustrated again because it feels like I'll never understand this, it's not as good as it could be, and I could like walk this arc for 12 years of someone's education as a programmer, and it's funny how you can like plot people along and go, oh, you're probably there, which is why I tend to give very pointed advice. When I'm talking in Discords and stuff, I'll give different advice to different people, because based on the comments I've seen, I'll be like, you should look up this topic. This is the next thing for you specifically to like further you along your path. So I don't know, it's always a fun part of the job to kind of figure out exactly where someone is and which direction they need to go in next,
Yeah, it's a good point. It's definitely very different at the different phases. It's funny how you mention it, like the whole story too, the whole just journey, because I've seen it happen for almost everybody. Like they go through that thing. with the design patterns too, just for anybody who's not familiar, you should really think of them as more of a description of common ways to do things or common ways that things are solved, not necessarily as a way that you would solve them. What I like about understanding design patterns is knowing that there are solutions to very common problems that have kind of a very shared structure and a shared language that's easy to communicate, right? If I can talk about a pattern using the lingo and terms for the pattern, it makes a lot more sense and it makes it a lot easier for me to explain, like in a sentence, how the code works instead of having to go through step by step and spend 3 to 5 minutes explaining something. Right? I can say, like, in one sentence, like, this is using this pattern. It's like I tell anybody it's using a singleton, and if they've written, code in Unity for a year or less, like, I can expect they're probably going to know what I'm talking about, right? I don't have to say, well, I added a public static instance to a thing, and there's only one of them available, and it's it's more about understanding the language of them and being able to communicate them. So when you hear design patterns, you hear people talking about a pattern, I say just go look up what that pattern is, so you kind of like know what it is that they're trying to communicate, but don't necessarily go try to shove it into your game, because that's exactly what I did. It's exactly what everybody does when they start to learn about them. Like, oh, I could shove this in here, I could shove that in there, I could shove this in there, and it doesn't necessarily work out that way, right?
Okay, so I have the opposite problem. The amount of times I'll be looking at someone's code or they're talking about a problem, I'll be like, oh, you could probably use a flyweight there. So like, what's that? Never mind. Or, maybe you should use visitor here. It's like, so it's fine if there's like the common ones. Everyone knows factories and repositories and whatever. But once you start getting into like units of work and some of the concurrency dictionary stuff and whatever, it's like people don't know these patterns unless they're doing them a lot. So like, yeah, or people know them by different names. People don't really know the relationship between observer pattern and the event system in C# or whatever. Like these are things that confuse people. So I found that while I agree with the sentiment, because so many times people don't know the patterns I'm talking about, I've learned that it's just I just don't find them as valuable as a tool unless I'm specifically talking about factory or repository or singleton or whatever.
I think it makes a bigger difference when you're on like a bigger team of engineers too. When you're talking to like, a team of 10 or 12 engineers and you're having a quick stand-up meeting or talking about the code and stuff, then the terminology pops up a lot more than if you're in the smaller teams, or like for me when I'm talking now to people in public, much less common. Like I find that I don't talk about design patterns or how to use them or even use the terminology nearly as much. Because yeah, people just get lost. Right? Like, you don't want to lose people. That's pointless. So I think we're getting close to the 3-hour mark now. I was going to get ready to start wrapping it up. I don't know if you guys had anything specific or important you wanted to just talk about before we end things. If so, I want to give you the opportunity.
Just that last question I think is important. That's the only one that comes to mind as last thing to touch on.
The split between successful games.
Yeah.
Pop it up and read it. So what do you think the split is between successful games that had clean, efficient code behind the scenes and successful games that were a complete mess, but still worked perfectly fine?
So this is hot take territory, and I'll probably lose some of my game dev cred for saying this, but despite the fact that I've spent years, literally years, on various podcasts talking about the value of clean code, here's the hot take: you don't need to write clean code to make a game. Shocker. It's not important. And it's as horrifying as it is for me to admit that, it's 100% true. And the reason why is because people misunderstand the point of clean code. It's not about pride. It's not about having code that looks shiny and nice. It's about maintenance and the ability to change. And in the majority of games, especially if you're your first time indie dev making your first game for Steam or whatever, that code base is made once. When you're done, you're done. And in fact, if you talk to most indie devs, if they've been working on a game for 2 to 3 years, they're glad to see it gone. They don't want to ever open that project again. They're happy to start the next one. So yeah, I think that the point is, we're talking about clean code because we know clean code. We've been doing it, and we can see where it helps us. But I'm not saying that you have to have a clean code base to make a good game, or that it's even necessary. I'm saying that if you understand how every tool in the shed works, you'll be more efficient at any task you do because you'll know what tools will apply to your problem. Could you still use the shed and use the basic tools you have? Yes, but having those tools available to you make everything easier and better. So I don't think the split is more about I think in general, you don't need it. Most games are fine, but some games shine slightly above the rest because of it. And the great one being example, we brought it a lot, is Playdead's Inside. They took the time. Now their clean code is not clean from the architectural standpoint. Their code is clean from they've solved their problems technically the way they want to for performance. So I guess the point is don't freak out about this concept of clean code or performance in either scenario for your game. Make your game and do as much as you need to get better, but it's about learning the tools so you can apply the right ones at the right time. I just find I know where certain boundary lines are better, valuable for me to draw, and other ones aren't. And some stuff I'll write cleaner, some stuff I won't. So I'm considering this as you probably don't know this, so it's valuable to teach you. Doesn't mean you should apply everything I'm saying to every project. So just think of it as adding more tools to your tool belt. So don't worry too much is kind of the point.
Yeah. I think that's some definitely good advice. And just keeping on that, when you talk about maintaining games, I just wanted to mention one of the reasons that I think I got so into just design patterns and maintainable code was that a lot of my game development time was on MMO games that last forever, and the code actually excuse me, has to be maintained, unlike most games, right? So it's a really weird scenario where I'm looking at code and going, oh no, what is this terrible thing that somebody wrote 12 years ago, and now I got to deal with it and try to fix it and figure out how to do this. Why didn't they use some pattern that I just learned about last week? But yeah, really your advice is dead on. Getting the game out there and getting it fun is the most important part. And lots of games released without even writing any code. Well, some games released without writing any code, just totally visual and stuff too, even. So and a lot of them, I would bet that if you decompiled or just looked at the source for most games, 70 or 80% are probably a giant bit of a mess, or at least have big parts that are a big mess. So.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a silly thing to say, but it's like saying someone could be a professionally trained Michelin star chef, but they still might just make a hamburger at home. They might do it slightly differently because they've learned a few tips and tricks about how to more efficiently, cut onions, but they're still just going to make a burger. They're not going to go and garnish everything in exactly the same way they would at work, but they might be more equipped to solve problems that are basic problems because they have more advanced tools at their disposal. So that's all I'm saying is that when it comes to enterprise, whether it's accurate. So goes wrong at enterprise, people lose money. Again, when you're working on banking software, you can't mistake a number or accidentally put a minus where there's a plus. You need to make sure these things work. And so because of this, your mentality is different. And I'm not saying that all of the stuff I used to do then is applicable to games, but I'm saying it taught me enough to see intersections of where it's valuable. So I think it's worth learning, because when there hits a point in your code, a good example of this is I know a guy making a game at the moment, and he's kind of frustrated that certain areas are hard to change. And I said, you can take certain parts, move it outside of Unity, and unit test those parts, and then put it back in again. You don't have to make the whole game in this big, complicated way, but you can apply these kind of advanced techniques to certain areas that kind of make certain things easier. So again, just tools you can add.
There's one other thing that we didn't mention too, is that knowing these things will help getting jobs. It will help in interviews. Being able to answer these questions when they pop up, it will definitely help in interviews. So the more you know, the better it'll go.
I've literally gotten jobs exclusively because I know some UDP stuff, and I know how to write APIs, and I know some REST stuff, and I know various other things from different jobs. So 100% knowing the pipeline. Like I said, I can describe from an AWS server a piece of data work its way through to the render pipeline on screen. Maybe I couldn't do every single bit perfectly, but I can explain how every piece moves and works, and where the data goes, and what format it's serializing to, what compression algorithms are applied to that serialization. This stuff is really valuable to just know how it works, because when it comes to jobs, you'll be much more equipped to debug and solve these issues. So 100%, it's just good to learn. It's valuable to have.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so this one from GameDev Guru. Should I hit me up sometime? Here, hop on the stream. Anyway, yeah, I guess we'll just wrap it up. Andrew, you got anything else you wanted to just drop in and mention?
Yeah, I'll just plug my own YouTube channel as well. We're still growing. Yeah, just send the link there. The Infinity VR YouTube channel. So we got Jim is making these videos with me, and they're on lots of topics that aren't just like our assets, but using Unity shaders, just random tips. We got a new one premiering in a half an hour or so that's all about using Notion, a third-party app just for making your own wiki on GameDev stuff. So we're really interested in finding out what kind of content people are looking for that fits a niche that isn't necessarily what Jason's doing or what other folks are doing. So check it out, and join us on our Discord to see if to give us basically your insights on what you want us to do for you.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm going to check out that premiere right after mine. My premiere is going to be short. It's only 9 minutes, and then I'm going to jump right over to yours. So I'll link. I'm going to link mine right now. And do you want to just drop yours in the chat real quick? The premiere video that you've got that's coming up. Everybody can just go hit the button, hit watch later, and then it'll just pop up and alert everybody. And then I'm going to drop in Jason's link too, so everybody can keep up with him. And I'm going to put that into the description as well. We can go do that right now, so I don't forget.
Yeah, so I don't have anything particular to plug, but just as Jason said, I posted a link to my Ko-fi page. Any updates I have, any sample projects or ideas, they're going to go there. So if you want to keep up there, and if you happen to like anything I'm saying, you could always donate. Just an option. Just putting it out there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, guys, for coming out, and thanks everybody for joining. There's my link one more time for the premiere, and I'm going to just drop Andrew's premiere link right down here too. If you're curious about assets in MMOs or AAA games, that's what my premiere thing's about. And like I said, it's short and hopefully interesting. And then I'm going to jump over to Andrew's too and just hop into the chat after that. So yeah, thanks again, everybody. Bye, I guess.
See you.
Yeah.
Yeah. The outro button. Where you at, outro?
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe.
Yeah, like and subscribe. Like, don't forget those buttons. Share the video. Now I'll outro. Bye.